Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This is part 2 of What If Naruto Was a Hollow. I have merged all the Naruto hollow what ifs I've made in past in this video, so that we can catch up faster where we all were before. There will be one more long what if after that. I will post the new parts probably from yesterday onwards. So, if you guys enjoy this what if, and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. I have created a playlist for this what if, where you can find all the parts, link is in the description. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content, it really means a lot. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this what if. Hollows are former human souls that are said to have lost their hearts to despair, or simply have spent too much time as a plus, becoming a creature only seen in a twisted nightmare. Most hollows have an extreme hunger for souls of both Shinigami and humans, to fill the void that was created by their loss of a heart. Before that, however, they will often seek out and eat the one they have loved, or the one they have had a strong obsession with during their lives. Tetsu no Kuni. This snow-covered country is considered the most secure place in the ninja world, as it has remained neutral for all of the shinobi world wars. It is here that the meeting place of the strongest shinobi in the world, the 5 Kages, takes place. Today, there would be two main threats that would enter this place. The first, comprising of Akatsuki, would cause quite the uproar, specifically due to the stunt of Uchiha Sasuke and his team, as well as the declaration of a fourth shinobi world war. The second would continue to go completely unknown. A perpetual cold inhabited the country, making for an extremely fierce climate. The biting cold made the wilderness of the country a bleak, depressing wasteland where life could be snuffed out in an instant. Not that that's the case for one particular hollow. A strange mountain, looking like 3 wolf heads, loomed overhead. Every ninja currently in the country was congregating to this spot. This was Tetsu no Kuni. Naruto himself was also heading towards this spot, his bestial body going unnoticed by the shinobi. Ever since he had killed that Shinigami, his hunger had increased. But no, not hunger for just any soul. To fill the void in his heart, he must devour this particular soul without fail. Naruto snarled. He was close. Something Naruto had noticed over the past few days was his subconscious ability to roughly sense a person's aura, as he called it. Of course, Naruto didn't know the formal name for it just yet, nor was it as concentrated as one would like it to be. However, he did manage to pick out 7 different Ryatsu signatures. Although not nearly as strong as that Shinigami's, they stood out as stronger than the rest of the people present. For a human, there were only a select few that had this much spiritual pressure, so Naruto was sure that his target was one of them. Going from the looks of things, it seemed that there was a large conflict going on at the summit of this mountain. He felt one of the auras flee, the others too busy with fighting to notice. His tail bristled, they all seemed very tasty at the moment, but there was only one that really mattered. The fleeing aura was getting farther away by the time Naruto reached the base of the mountain. The quadrupedal hollow raised a paw up, and sank it into the face of the rock. It yielded surprisingly easily under the razor-sharp claws, and Naruto was able to haul himself smoothly up the mountain, using all 4 of his claws as leverage. And so, today was the day that a hollow snuck effortlessly into the Tetsu no Kuni. While Naruto was sneaking into the Kage meeting, a group of 5 Shinigami were standing over the mutilated corpse of Hosoke Masaru, scrutinizing their dead comrade carefully. Like Masaru, they were from the 10th division, even though their experience far outweighed the dead new recruit. Around a week ago, Masaru had been dispatched to the real world to perform Kanso on the souls that were killed during Pain's attack, something that most of the members of the 10th division were against. This particular group of Shinigami were among them. Around 5 days after Masaru's trip to the real world, the 10th division discovered via Hell Butterfly that he had been killed by a hollow. Masaru may have been a new recruit, but even he shouldn't have been killed by a hollow that was barely an hour old. The leader, a man with black hair pulled into a rat tail, stood at the front. He squatted down low, looking at the lacerations and torn flesh that adorned Masaru's body. Looks like the hollow really did a number on him. It's not surprising that he would fall in battle. That was the exact reason why we were so against him coming to the real world. One of the Shinigami, a brown-haired one to the right of him, piped up. But, considering the sloppy way the hollow ate him, it seemed that it wasn't even an hour old at the time. The leader nodded his agreement. That certainly seems to be the case. It's probably because of the location. Let's face it, everyone here is prepped for combat. We're lucky that a hollow hasn't come out of this place in a long time. Two of the Shinigami looked at each other, their perturbed expressions enough to convey what they were thinking. One of them was brave enough to voice his opinion. What does this mean? One of two things. Either Masaru was too weak to kill this fresh hollow, something I deem unlikely. Or we've got ourselves a potentially dangerous hollow on our hands, the leader stated grimly. The Shinigami tensed. Never had they been so troubled before on a mission. It looked like he was too late. The Kage summit was in shambles. Many people, both samurai and ninja alike, lay dead on the ground from the attack. However, the Kaze, Mizu, Tsuchi, and Raikages were still up and standing. They appeared to surveying the area. Naruto scowled. Out of the 7 heavy auras previously here, his target was not one of the 4 that remained. He slashed at a nearby pile of rubble in frustration, making the 4 Kages look at it in confusion. He was beginning to get impatient. The hollow let out a deep breath. He needed to be calm if he ever wanted to succeed. Naruto opened up his senses again. 2 of the 3 remaining auras were moving rapidly away from the summit, one appearing to chase after the other. The last one seemed to be at a standstill farther from here. Naruto's decision was obvious. There was a greater chance of finding his target in the 2 moving auras. Some distance away, the auras that were Sasuke and Danzo had stopped to duke it out in a battle of Sharingan, with Sasuke struggling with Danzo's Izanagi. However, Danzo currently only had 5 Sharingan eyes left on his body, the Izanagi causing most of them to shut. Kuchiyose no Jutsu. A giant puff of smoke emerged from the jutsu, before revealing an extremely large tapir-like animal, the Baku too, which compensated for the loss of Sharingans. The large chimera opened its maw, and proceeded to suck in a huge amount of air, taking various debris with it. Danzo used this opportunity to shun Shin behind Sasuke, who was disoriented from the attack. Futon, Shinku Renpa, 3. Danzo opened his mouth, and expelled a dozen wind blades, which plowed into Sasuke's Susanoo, causing it to bend back. However, while Danzo was dealing with Susanoo, Sasuke had taken the opportunity to send a fireball straight into the Baku's mouth. Naruto was starting to get excited. His instincts as a hollow were telling him that a great battle was taking place up ahead. He smirked, even if it looked more like a sneer than a smirk. He would likely devour the both of them, even if one of them wasn't his target. It wasn't long now. He could see them up ahead. The old fool, who was named the 6th Hokage, was one of them, he noticed, and the other was. Naruto stopped. A feeling of intense euphoria filled him, and he lost what little self-control he had left. The battle was over. Sasuke had used a weak genjutsu to trick Danzo, who now lay on the ground, all of the Sharingan eyes on his arm closed. Sasuke stood over him, glaring at him hatefully. This is a battle of eyes. Don't mess with the Uchiha, declared Sasuke. Sasuke glared deeper, but after a few seconds an oppressive force drew Sasuke's attention from Danzo, and a hissing noise sounded in his ear. Don't mess with the Uchihas. A deep mocking voice resonated throughout the entire area. As the voice said that, Sasuke turned around so fast it looked like his neck would snap. Madara and the fallen Danzo had noticed it too, yet Karen just stood around, an ignorant look on her face. Sorry Sasuke, but it looks like this time I'm going to have to mess with the Uchihas. The voice called out again. This statement only served to make Sasuke even angrier. Who are you? Show yourself. Sasuke immediately regretted his outburst. For the thing did in fact show itself. It was a blur at first, and Sasuke had to strain to see it, even with his Sharingan. But, the longer he looked at it, the clearer a shape formed. It was 8 feet from head to tail, and vaguely resembled a fox. But it more accurately represented a sick, twisted nightmare of a creature. It seemed to be just standing over there, hunched slightly as it faced their direction. Its soulless, black and yellow eyes peered at Sasuke in particular. The targeted human suppressed a shudder at the sight of the thing, but he held his ground. He tensed, lowering himself into his standard taijutsu stance. It had been a long time since anything had ever made him this nervous. "That Sharingan of yours seems to be the reason you can see me," the creature mused. A thoughtful look set itself upon its face. "But that's fine, this will make it far more satisfying when I eat you." A malicious grin replaced the thoughtful look. Sasuke's eye widened. That last statement had taken creepy to a whole new level. "Eat me?" he asked. "That's right, Sasuke, eat you. You, the one who I've been hunting for quite some time now. But now's not the time to be talking. I've been waiting for this moment forever." At this point in time, Sasuke had had quite enough of this creature's nonsense. It was just spouting out garbage, but how did it know whether it was capable of eating him? Snapping out of his trance, he rushed towards the hollow in order to find out. Naruto grinned at the approach. To a human, it was an insanely high-level taijutsu. But to a hollow, it was nothing special, and nothing he couldn't avoid. Sasuke's punch snapped forward, his right fist aiming for the hollow's strange mask. Naruto just stood there, taking the blow head-on. Sasuke felt his hand make contact with a particularly hard material, and it didn't even feel like he caused any damage. Naruto's thick skin pulled through for him, as it easily absorbed the force of the impact. The hollow then shot out his left claw, catching Sasuke around the neck. His tail shot up like a snake, and he slammed it into the Uchiha, sending him flying through the air. As Sasuke was falling, Naruto jumped into the air, grabbed his head, and slammed him point-blank into a nearby rock. "Kawarimi," Naruto hissed, as nothing remained but a heavily splintered log. The thought of that annoying jutsu made his blood boil. Whatever the case, Sasuke had barely escaped his assault. When he reappeared, he still looked a little ragged. "You know, Sasuke, I always thought you would put up more of a fight." Sasuke jumped at the creature's usage of his name, and he voiced his shock quite soundly. "How do you know my name?" he asked. "Oh, I'm hurt, Sasuke. Here's a hint. Who's the one who's been hunting after you for the past 3 years, Dadabayo?" said Naruto in a mocking voice. The last word was purposely altered so it sounded just like Naruto as a 12-year-old. Sasuke's eyes widened. "Naruto? On the mark. What the hell happened to you?" Naruto sighed. "Oh, the usual. Fighting Akatsuki, dying, having my friends betray me, having that old scumbag over their experiment on my corpse." The hollow took the time to glare over at the wounded Danzo. The man seemed at a loss for words in front of this monstrosity. "You. Save it, Danzo. I'll deal with you in due time. But first." He glanced back at Sasuke. "I have to deal with my biggest mistake." By now, Sasuke was ready for round 2. "Fine then, Naruto. We shall settle things here." Despite his exhausted state, he activated the Mangekyo Sharingan. "And I will show you not to mess with the Uchihas." At that point, all hell broke loose. Madara, for all this time, had never taken any action throughout this entire ordeal. On one hand, he was perturbed by the appearance of this strange creature, but because of all his great experience and age, remained relatively calm throughout the situation. What really got him though, was the fact that this thing was the newly deceased Kyuubi Jinchuriki. He didn't know what the hell had happened, but apparently he could only see it through the use of his Sharingan. That would explain why the girl over there didn't know what was going on. The death of the boy had come as a large shock to the elder Uchiha. He had trusted Nagato to be able to bring him back alive. When the fake Akatsuki leader showed his face again, he informed Madara that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki had died. That threw one hell of a wrench in his plans. He had had to ignore that for the time being, he'd deal with that problem when the time came. So, he went on ahead with his plan to infiltrate the Kage summit. But, as it turns out, the Kyuubi boy was much bigger of a surprise than he thought. The Akatsuki leader turned his attention back to Sasuke. Things were getting bad. He was getting worn down. Everything he tried was being shrugged off like it was nothing. He knew that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki had changed into a monster, but this much of a power difference was absurd. Amaterasu! Sasuke screamed, trying a new technique. He bled profusely from the Mangekyo, but black flames did indeed sprout up around the area, including Naruto. The Amaterasu flames, capable of burning through anything. No opponent could survive this technique, at least, no human opponent. The flames were indeed on Naruto, but seeing as they were made from chakra, not Ryatsu, they had no effect on the hollow's tough skin. Naruto was able to shrug off the flames like they were nothing. "This is the so-called Amaterasu," said Naruto mockingly. "I must say, Sasuke, I'm disappointed. I thought you were stronger than this." A flare of rage, customary to Sasuke, bubbled up inside him. "Shut up, Naruto. I am stronger than you, and always have been. Who's the one who's failed to catch me up until now?" Sasuke glared up into the currently apathetic yellow eyes of Naruto, who started to notice the real world fading, and an illusionary world forming. It was a very strange world. The normal laws of physics didn't seem to apply here. Everything was a different color than what it should have been. A sinister chuckle reverberated throughout the entire world. "Finally, I'm able to achieve Tsukuyomi. You should be grateful, Naruto, since you're the first opponent I've ever fully used this on." From the floor, a despicable liquid emerged. It oozed out of the illusionary ground at a rate slower than that of molasses. Pretty soon, a small puddle had formed, which began to slowly take a human shape. As it was happening, more and more puddles began appearing all over the illusion, creating dozens of silhouettes. Sasuke's Tsukuyomi was different than that of Itachi's. For one thing, while Itachi's exuded a cold, apathetic aura, Sasuke's created a malicious aura. One that wanted to cause their victim to go through as much pain as inhumanely possible. The illusions of Sasuke creeped slowly towards Naruto, whose large frame was unmoving. This unnerved the real Sasuke slightly. Naruto didn't seem to be frozen in fear or shock. He just seemed to be unmoving. Naruto wanted nothing more than to grin at the moment Sasuke cast his genjutsu. He restrained himself, however, as that would give him away. The Hollow didn't want that. No, not at all. He was a predator, and one who liked to mess with his prey, making them think that they had any chance at all of victory. However, he did not truly know why the genjutsu was not affecting him. Indeed, if you looked from Naruto's perspective, all you would see is the last Uchiha do some silly-looking impressions, and not really looking that intimidating at all. Especially to an 8-foot-tall monster. In truth, though, the way genjutsu works is that it attacks the chakra flow in the brain, causing the victim's senses to be distorted into the various images that the genjutsu provides. Naruto, who is dead, has no chakra, and thus, there is no way for him to be manipulated. Nonetheless, Sasuke thought that his target was under genjutsu, and began to move forward. Why waste the chance to finish off his opponent while he was distracted? Sasuke reached behind his back and pulled out his Kusanagi, and smoothly yet cautiously approached the Hollow. Naruto resisted the urge to facepalm. He had now figured it out. The Uchiha apparently had tried a genjutsu, but something was making it so it was ineffective. Sasuke had confidence in his genjutsu though, seeing as the Uchiha had just rushed him at point blank. But still, why waste this opportunity? The cunning Hollow held his face down, feigning some kind of torture. He emitted various levels of screams and spasms, giving his opponent the impression that the genjutsu was effective. The Uchiha relished in this, fully convinced of his success. Pathetic. With all that talk earlier, you still fell to an Uchiha's genjutsu. I guess the Dobe's personalities do not change, even if their bodies do. Sasuke walked slowly toward the hollow, kneeling down when he got there. The Uchiha breathed on Naruto's head. I'll say it again. Naruto. Don't mess with the Uchihas. He prepared his sword for an attempt to end the hollow's life. He did not notice the cunning, the malicious smirk on Naruto's face. Faster than the eye can see, a large claw shot out and grasped Sasuke's head. Sasuke, having the full belief that his genjutsu was working, was thoroughly unprepared for the assault. The claw slammed his head brutally into the ground. You are the arrogant one here, Sasuke. You have so much faith in your little genjutsu, now don't you? You walked right in front of me without even thinking of using kawarimi, Naruto said. Naruto severely tightened his grip on Sasuke's head, causing the Uchiha to scream. And that mistake will cost you your life. Naruto's grin widened, any resemblance of sanity now gone. Oh, how I've been waiting for this moment, Sasuke. It's been almost unbearable. But putting that aside, where should I start? He mulled over, taking glances at Sasuke's head and arms. Naruto rolled his black eyes almost lazily, but didn't loosen his grip on Sasuke's head. Oh, that's right, I wouldn't want to make this too merciful on you, now would I? He asked rhetorically. Sasuke said nothing, but his increased breathing would indicate that he was becoming nervous. Naruto opened his mouth, revealing ludicrously long and sharp canine teeth. He then tore into Sasuke's left arm, devouring everything he could. To Sasuke, it felt like 1,000 cold, miniature knives and chainsaws were grinding into his arm at every possible angle, making it total agony. He screamed in severe pain as his arm was reduced to a lump of scattered bone, skin, and sinew. Naruto looked at his handiwork. He had created a stump out of Sasuke's left arm. The screams were equally satisfying. He looked around, before beginning the same process on Sasuke's other arm. How does it feel, Sasuke? Asked Naruto. Sasuke weakly murmured something incoherent. Naruto put his face close to the Uchiha. What's that, you want more? Sasuke's eyes widened like saucers. Well, I was going to finish it soon. Naruto lied. But now that I think about it, there's no rush. So I guess I can grant your request. Naruto flipped the Uchiha from on his back to on his stomach. A maniacal grin set upon his face as he tore into Sasuke's abdominal area. His bloodlust grew as he ate the Uchiha's flesh, though he held himself back from eating anything vital. Sasuke screamed even more. To him, this was 100 times worse than the treatment of his arm. In fact, now, Sasuke would be willing to give almost anything to have that back. Blood gushed from Sasuke's wound in torrents. It was a miracle that he wasn't dead yet. No, not quite a miracle, but a fine precision. Naruto had purposefully left Sasuke's organs alone, instead opting to create just a heavy flesh wound. Sasuke had now lost the ability to speak. The pain was too great for that. Now, he just wanted it to end. Luckily for him, Naruto was just about to grant him that wish. Just like before, Naruto lunged his open mouth straight ahead, this time going to Sasuke's head. The skin and muscle was breached immediately underneath the powerful incisors. Naruto gave a push, and his eyes, the precious Sharingan eyes, were mashed and eaten as well. No! And no, were the frantic thoughts of the dying Uchiha. His gave one final scream as Naruto began to devour his brain. Sasuke was already dead, but Naruto continued to eat the dead Uchiha's brain, savoring the meal. As soon as he was finished devouring the soul, he felt his power begin to grow. His goal, was complete. And it didn't take much effort at all. Now, he could focus on other things. When the Hollows has finally buried their obsession, two paths will open for it. The first is the more common path. Once burying their obsession, they lose their intelligence, and simply become mindless creatures bent on finding the most powerful souls to devour. They can, however, regain their intelligence by spending time with more intelligent hollows. The second path creates a much more dangerous hollow, one that has retained its intelligence. These are the hollows that ascend to Menos status. They share the desire to eat powerful souls, but they are capable of much more complex things, in particular, the ability to hold a grudge. Danzo and Madara were simply stunned. Not only had this thing showed up claiming to be the deceased Konoha pariah, he had also brutalized Sasuke. While Madara was lamenting the loss of his newest subordinate, Danzo was starting to get nervous. He had witnessed Sasuke's death, and even he didn't believe that anything had that much sheer cruelty. This creature simply reeked of it. There was no way that it was Uzumaki Naruto. But putting that aside, Danzo was beginning to fear for his life. What made matters worse was that Madara was just sitting off to the side idly, watching the latest development with a curious mixture of shock and intrigue. Naruto turned to the two old men, his steely gaze falling on Danzo in particular. Without warning, he kicked Sasuke's remains in the air, which landed in front of the injured shinobi. You will take that back to the village. Tell them publicly about just how painful his death. However, if you tell them just what or who killed him, then you will receive the same treatment as him. He motioned at the dead Uchiha. No matter how filthy your soul may taste. Naruto spat out the last part with so much venom that the old Hokage shivered. Danzo was many things, but he was no fool. He knew in an instant that this creature could and would follow up with what he said. Naruto turned his gaze to Madara. The same thing applies to you, Madara. The elder Uchiha said nothing. I finally kept my promise, he whispered mockingly. In its own bastardized way, he actually sort of had. Even if it meant nothing more than burying his obsession, the promise was fulfilled. He didn't think it would be that easy. He really didn't. Hell, he was almost bored with this turn of events. Turns out the old fool actually went ahead and listened to him. He told Konoha all about the Uchiha's untimely death. Naruto really wished he had a camera. The look on Sakura's face had been priceless. But he had finally kept his promise. Even in death, it would be a cold day in hell when Naruto ever broke a promise. There was now nothing left in the village to burden him anymore. Which means that he could finally be able to go all out on the place. Naruto was currently on the outskirts of the village, looking through the open gates. He sneered, oh, how he hated this place. Apparently, the Uchiha was being mourned by a good portion of the village, as if he was still a hero. But it wasn't like he could blame them. The majority of the civilians didn't know about Sasuke's plans. But now was the time for action. He had brought back Sasuke, so now he could make Sakura a sobbing heap of depression before he killed her. Yes, she would be the last to die. First, she was torn from her love, and now she will see the rest of the village fall right in front of her. Naruto's tails twitched with excitement. This would be fun. Naruto wasted no time in his exploit. The hollow rushed through the ruined streets of Konoha, thoroughly intent on finishing his job. To prove his point, Naruto sank his powerful teeth into the shoulder of the closest villager. The man screaming in pain, blood gushed from his wound. The villagers around him looked on in shock and confusion as the man was torn limb from limb, and swiftly devoured with no visible source. They looked around, and when another villager was killed in just the same way, fear overcame their reason. Panic. The villagers scattered to and from in every possible direction, not wanting whatever that had happened to that man to happen to them. The panic increased as 3 more villagers were eaten. Shopkeepers jumped out of their stalls and into the crowds, knocking their merchandise everywhere in a blind attempt to escape. Ninjas were jumping onto the scene, trying to quell the panic as well as attempt to subdue the problem. To Naruto, it was such a beautiful thing. These people would die without even knowing how. And the pathetic ninja would be able to do nothing to stop him. Naruto reared back and roared with laughter. He had never felt so alive. If this was what the afterlife was like, he would have died a long time ago. A whoosh of movement drew Naruto's attention away from his feast, and his laughter stopped. "Whoa, it looks like you're having a blast," came an unfamiliar voice, as a few presences stood directly behind Naruto. There, dressed in their standard black robes, were 5 Shinigami. A standard patrol unit, if you will, but Naruto was quick to notice the arrogant smirks on all of their faces. "Shinigami. It seems I can never get enough of you people. That buddy of yours can attest to that." The leader frowned. "Oh, and what buddy are you talking about?" Naruto put his hand on his cheek, a gesture oddly out of place in the pandemonium. "Oh, let's see, I think his name was Masaru or Musare or something like that." The 5 Shinigami tensed, the smirks on their faces dropping to be replaced by looks of anger. This was the hollow that had killed Masaru, as a fresh hollow. It had been 3 weeks since that time, so this hollow may have advanced since then. Naruto opened his eyes wider as a sick grin spread across his face. He was very good. The response came as nothing more than a whisper, but it succeeded in putting the Shinigami even more on edge. One of the Shinigami got bold. "Monster! Die, hollow scum!" The large, bald Shinigami screamed as he brandished his sword and charged Naruto. "Idiot! Don't let him get under your skin," the leader screamed at the berserk Shinigami. Naruto deftly avoided a sword strike by leaping into the air, and afterwards his tail shot out and attempted to impale the reckless Shinigami. He was alarmed when the Shinigami caught it. Naruto winced as the Shinigami tightened his grip on the tail. "What the hell are you doing?" The Shinigami gave no reply, instead choosing to twirl the tail around his head, which made Naruto spin round and round like a lopsided windmill. The Shinigami let go of his tail, sending Naruto flying into a makeshift house. The villagers paused for a split second to stare in confusion at the damage, but soon went back to their pandemonium. Naruto pushed the rubble off of him and got ready to continue the battle. Another Shinigami appeared in front of him in midair with a slash that Naruto managed to avoid, but not without taking a shallow cut on the torso. Naruto staggered, before following up with a claw swipe, which caught the Shinigami on the face. "Hisao!" The brown-haired Shinigami clutched his face. Being slashed by 8-inch claws had created a deep enough wound for the relatively fragile Shinigami to be incapacitated for a few minutes. The fox flew towards the wounded Shinigami, attempting to do his trademark impale. He almost got his hand lopped off by the leader of the Shinigami. He reared back and noticed that the remaining 2 Shinigami had joined the fray in an attempt to protect their comrade. 5-on-1. "Doesn't seem very fair, now does it?" mocked Naruto. "Shut up, Hollow. We don't have to be fair against the likes of you," yelled the bald Shinigami. "Shut your hole, bastard. I wasn't talking to you." Naruto roared back. He didn't notice that his Ryatsu seemed to increase after that, but the rest of the Shinigami certainly did. Naruto turned to the leader after he was finished berating the bald man. "You seem stronger than the rest of them. What's your name, Shinigami?" 20th seat of the 10th Division, Moriguchi Kichiro. Interesting, that other Shinigami didn't mention anything about Shinigami ranks. Care to elaborate? Kichiro scoffed. "I don't think so. That fool of a new recruit may have been so willing to give out information, but don't think it's the same for me." The 20th seat gestured to the remaining 2 Shinigami, the youngest man and the only female. "Attack!" The other 2 Shinigami rushed at Naruto, providing a distraction for Kichiro. Naruto blocked both Shinigami, but failed to properly react to an incoming Kichiro. He protected his mask in order to minimize the damage, but he was still sent flying back. The hollow skidded along the air, coming to a halt 20 feet away. He was then hit with a heavy punch from the bald Shinigami, which sent him flying to earth, leaving the wounded hollow in a crater. He was lying on his back, with Hisao shakily coming in for the killing blow. "Too naive!" Naruto shouted, as he shifted to the left, causing Hisao's Zanpakuto to stab into the ground. He whipped his tail around, hitting Hisao in his claw wound. Giving his opponents no time to react, he quickly grasped Hisao's face and began to squeeze. Hisao, who was still trying to pull his Zanpakuto out of the ground, had no chance. He let out a small yell as Naruto tightened his grip. "Hisao!" yelled the female of the group. "Let of Hisao, you bastard!" screamed Kichiro, as he desperately attempted another attack. He was too late. Crunch. The four Shinigami looked on as Hisao's head was crushed easily under the hollow's strong hand. He died instantly as his skull caved in under the pressure, and blood poured from openings in Hisao's head. Naruto shook the blood from his hands. "A pathetic Shinigami. Am I correct in assuming that he was the weakest one among you?" said Naruto coldly. The four Shinigami screamed in rage, wanted to pulverize this hollow into a bloody pulp. The four of them attacked Naruto at the same time, effectively catching the hollow off guard. And this time, there was rage fueling their attacks. Naruto had barely managed to stop a slash from the female Shinigami when he was attacked by Kichiro. The hollow winced, and then screamed as he was slashed through the middle. He fell backwards in a heap. The wound was deep. Naruto huffed and puffed. They had really done a number on him before that, and now they had to throw in a huge slash. The four Shinigami were now towering over the fallen hollow, the rage on their faces faded to cold apathy. "You're finished, Hollow," said Kichiro quietly. Naruto's eyes widened in rage at the statement. "No! I can't let it end here. I have to destroy Konoha. I have to. I won't let little shits like you get in my way." The Shinigami took a wary step back. Naruto's rage was allowing his Ryatsu to pour out of his body, stronger than before. Rage was fueling him similarly to determination when he was alive. But this time, the combat abilities and maliciousness was greater. The hollow rushed the four Shinigami blindly, shrieking in rage. The three non-seated Shinigami barely managed to avoid the attack, but Kichiro got a lucky stab in the ribs to the fox. Naruto fell to his knees, breathing even heavier than before. He was getting too wounded, and he didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. His sight was getting blurrier, and these Shinigami didn't look like they would let up anytime soon. His aura, as he called it, seemed to resonate with something. He felt a strong urge to touch a claw to the air around him, and he used the last of his strength to do just that. "No good. I have to." His thoughts were interrupted when a strange thing showed up. It stood 3 feet away, very brilliant in the air. Apparently the Shinigami noticed it too. It opened slowly, serrated shapes flowing upward in a coordinated motion. It was oval-shaped, showing nothing but a dark, swirling void inside. Despite its strange features, Naruto yearned for it. He didn't know why he felt this. This strange sense of kinship for this portal. It was almost like going home after being gone on a long trip. But it was a kind of different home, a true home. Whatever the case, he simply wanted to plunge himself into it. Kichiro would have none of this. He readied himself for another slash at Naruto, but too late. Naruto had already entered the black void, which closed as soon as Kichiro slashed down upon him. Shit! How did that hollow figure out how to use Garganta so early? Not to mention he was capable of fighting 5 Shinigami to a standstill, killing one of them. Soul Society may have a heap of trouble thanks to our mistake. Kichiro kicked the ground in frustration. The other 3 Shinigami looked at him in sympathy. While they had all liked Hisao, none were as close to him as their 20th seat. But the words of their leader were coming back to haunt. Would that hollow really become a huge threat? They had no idea. The black portal deposited Naruto on a sandy desert. White sand and quartz trees littered the place, and in the perpetual night sky, a pure white crescent moon filled the land with its only light source. It was beautiful, in its own way. Naruto did indeed feel the particular feeling of coming back home, but that thought was overshadowed by those of the Shinigami. He laid down on the ground sleepily, and punched the sand with his fist. Fuck! Who do those Shinigami think they are, to get in the way of my revenge? I'll kill them. I'll kill all of them. From now on, every Shinigami I meet is a dead man, no matter who they are, he exclaimed in a flurry of rage. Naruto had no idea how much that sentiment was shared throughout the white sand of Huecomundo. He laid there for a while, feeling nothing but the cool sand on his body as it moved about its path. His mustard yellow eyes were unfocused, instead simply pointed down at the ground, looking at nothing. It would seem like he was asleep or even dead. But Naruto Uzumaki was very much awake and alive. His previous rage for the Shinigami had subsided, and now he was left with nothing but confusion. Despite his joy on coming to this place, he still had no idea where he was or what he would do with himself and his vengeance now. A sharp jolt of pain shot through his body, and he looked down at the wound inflicted from the Shinigami and frowned. It wouldn't do to have sand get in the wound. He stretched his legs and tail before pulling himself upright, looking at the crescent moon overhead. It was a strange moon, in that it seemed almost unnatural. Underneath the moon, there was an extremely tall sand dune, easily dwarfing the others in the vicinity. The top of the dune would be a perfect place to get a better perspective on this entire place. He approached the dune, and sank his sharp claws into the confines of the sand. Little bits of sand fell off, but it seemed stable enough to climb. Gently, he placed his other limbs inside before beginning his ascent. The sand dune was about 400 feet in height, and it didn't take Naruto very much time to finish scaling it, his sharp claws and ninja background being of remarkable help. As he reached the top, he thought he noticed some kind of strange peculiarity way off in the distance, but he quickly brushed it off as his wound began to flare up again. Wow, what a view, the hollow thought as he looked over the white desert. Its sheer magnitude appalled him. There was nothing but sand for as far as the eye could see. Quartz trees littered the entire landscape, and he vaguely spotted one or two more hollows off in the far distance, their appearance incredibly different from his own. He turned around to view a similar scene from behind. It was such a surreal scene that the desert seemed like it had a life of its own. The sand undulated up and down, side to side, and made choices on where to go. Unpredictable they were, but life itself was unpredictable. Naruto knew at that moment that his life would be governed by the desert. Things that happen, and people that he will meet are all on account of the desert's will. But if the desert governed his life, then the moon governed the deserts. It provided dim light to the desert, and allowed it to be in existence in the first place. Naruto felt a strange sense of curiosity come over him. He felt that there was something more to this place. Something beyond the sand. His mind was just screaming at him to go find out what it was. Without thinking, he jumped off of the sand dune, not harmed in the slightest from the fall. He landed 5 feet next to a quartz tree, before one of his feet got stuck in something. It was like the sand had started to collapse on itself, the pressure forming a concave structure. Then the sand fell entirely, leaving a sort of pit that would be used in a pitfall or ant-lion pit. The fox hollow's eyes widened as gravity performed its dirty work. He grasped onto a branch of the tree, but it was to no avail. The branch snapped off as if it was a twig. He fell forward, and he tried to grab onto the sand, only to have run it straight through his fingers. He felt a strange sensation, and realized that his already underground legs were pulling him into the subterranean reaches of the world. Below the surface of the sand, in the subterranean Menos forest, several dozen hollows were duking it out, every one of them attempting to bury its soul by eating fellow hollow. A distance away from the swarming mass of flesh and mask stood a dozen jillion, each one milling about in an unruly rhythm reminiscent of their kind. A small amount of sand fell onto a single hollow's head, causing it to glance upwards in confusion. This setback gave enough time for another hollow to sink its teeth into the confused hollow's shoulder. Then, a small portion of the sand ceiling completely gave way, drawing the attention of the hollows and even the jillion. The sand eventually cleared, and the beings below noticed a small, vexing object falling directly down to the bottom. It disappeared behind a large quartz tree for a moment, before landing about 100 feet away. The hollows stared at the new arrival, their previous hunger for each other conveniently forgotten. The distorted figure had risen to its feet, and the dust began to clear. Before them stood a fox-like hollow, its animalistic features very prominent and unique, but it was still clearly one of their own. One of the bolder hollows rushed towards the newcomer, clearly enticed by the exceptional power that it was giving off. Naruto, meanwhile, was still disoriented from the sudden fall. He barely had time to register the large, gaping maw that attempted to bite into him. He clumsily avoided the attack, taking time to glare as he did. He then followed up with a well-placed kick, which easily sent the hollow flying back. The sudden attack of the hollow caused the others to continue with what they were doing, eat each other. What are they doing, he thought, as he watched the others devour each other in a frenzy. While Naruto was thinking, the hollow attacking him took time to swing one of its wiry limbs at him. The obnoxious limb missed, and went crashing into the rock ground. Before the hollow could retract it, it was stepped on by one of Naruto's claws, which pinned it straight into the ground. He eyed the tentacle, an unreadable look in his black eyes. Then, he sank his teeth into the joint, before ripping it clean off. He didn't know why he was compelled to do it. He supposed it was just his hollow instincts. Nevertheless, his sharp teeth ripped off the tentacle limb with serious gusto. It's good, thought Naruto as he began to eat the detached tentacle. Green blood dribbled from his mouth, making him look all the more menacing. Naruto was an intelligent hollow, there was no doubt about that. However, that hollow was almost as satisfying as a Shinigami. Even an intelligent hollow like him wouldn't be able to resist his natural hollow instincts. He grinned fearfully, and burst forth into the fray with unnatural speed, biting and tearing anything that got in his way in an attempt to satiate himself. Naruto stumbled into his cave, clutching the side wound he received from a particularly nasty hollow. He had found the cave very high up on the subterranean cliffs of the Menos forest, and it was nearly unreachable to those who didn't know the way. It had been a few weeks' time since his descent into the forest, and the hollow had been trying to balance escaping, revenge, and hunger. So far, it hadn't gone too well, as there weren't that many exits back to the surface it would seem. He had traveled out many miles but didn't come across something that even looked like it would function as an exit. The hollow turned around and looked across the horizon. He avoided that place, as that was where the Ajichas hid. Naruto had gained some knowledge of the world with every non-mindless hollow he ate. The underground of Huecomundo was where the generally weak hollows lurked. Even the Ajichas here were low-level. So, if he was to find a way to destroy Konoha and fight the Shinigami, it would have to be on the surface. Naruto growled. Even if the Ajichas were low-level, they were still Ajichas. It would be best not to cross them. He looked down. Things seemed to be going on normally. He had recently seen a group of hollows become a Jillian, and frankly it both excited him and worried him. On one hand, the amount of power gained was beautifully enticing. On the other hand, the thought of becoming mindless wasn't very appealing. He quietly mused on this topic, before he saw it. A garganta had formed on the forest floor, and a small group of hollows came spewing out of it. They seemed to be running from something. Naruto looked at them with one eye, almost dismissing the entire thing. But that was before 20 or 30 Shinigami also came out of the garganta, apparently in pursuit of the escaping hollows. Naruto turned his full attention to them as he saw one of the Shinigami gut a random hollow. All of the hollows stopped, each one looking at their disappearing brethren. In a heartbeat, there were now 5 more who joined the first one, none of them able to register what happened before it was too late. Then the carnage broke loose. The hollows were now completely focused on the Shinigami, each one wanting to consume them. Naruto looked on in anger. This was such a blatant disregard for his species. Yes, hollows ate humans, Shinigami, and each other, but Naruto knew that every hollow accepted this as a part of life. The food chain, if you will. He felt his hatred for the Shinigami rise a notch. Here were these beings, who fancied themselves divine protectors to humans. They also considered it their birthright to slaughter the hollow species en masse. They didn't understand that this was the way things worked. Their protocol was just unnatural. With a roar, the fox leaped from his cave, eager to spill some Shinigami blood. He fell nearly 200 feet, which would have killed a human, but thankfully he was not one of those. After landing, he noticed that the current hollows were losing very easily. Occasionally, one of the stronger hollows would overwhelm and kill a Shinigami, but they were still being pushed back. He slipped into the battle carefully and gutted one Shinigami before devouring it. He was about to go for a second one before his claws were stopped by a Zanpakuto. The sharp objects met with a clang, and neither combatant was able to get the advantage. Naruto stepped back and began to carefully scrutinize his opponent. He was a Shinigami of average height with spiky burgundy hair. He held a serious frown, though not one that was unfriendly or scornful. Unknown to him, the Shinigami's name was Kano Ashido. He wasn't as battle-hardened as he would be in years to come, nor did he have the same battle experience and abilities. But to say he wasn't the strongest of the group would be insulting to him. He was the most skilled with the Zanpakuto, even if he never managed to unlock Shirkai. His Kido also trumped almost everyone in the group, save for a few specialists. Ashido didn't spare a word, preferring not to converse with Hollows. Naruto was going to say something, but was cut off by Ashido's sudden attack. Naruto barely had enough time to block with his tail, but Ashido kept on pressing. He had virtually no defense, but the strength and erratic fighting style more than made up for it. The Hollow pulled off from Ashido's strikes and reappeared to the left side of him. He attempted to bite the Shinigami, but Ashido went for a thrust straight through the Hollow's mouth. It was ineffective though, as Naruto bit down on the blade, stopping its assault. The Shinigami tried to pull it free, a grunt of frustration on his face. Naruto's jaw was just too strong for him to actually have any success. The Hollow, meanwhile, began looking around himself for a short time. Another Hollow had drilled through a Shinigami to the left of him, and yet Ashido kept up a calm facade. Naruto pulled the sword out of his mouth, and blocked the predictable counterattack with his tail. Ashido put some distance between himself and his opponent, feeling that direct combat would be useless. The fox leered at the unagitated face of his adversary. "You Shinigami don't care much for your comrades, do you?" he mocked. Ashido glared at the fox, finally letting some exploitable emotion onto his face. "And what would you know about Shinigami camaraderie, Hollow?" he asked. "Oh, I know plenty about it, Shinigami. Your pathetic trust in your comrades and in your own abilities make most of you very arrogant. I'm very sure that most of the Shinigami here think you would clean up all the Hollows here, go home." Naruto paused in his speech as he saw a Hollow puncture another Shinigami. He closed one eye and smiled sadistically. "And call it a day," he finished. If the sounds and sights of fighting did not exist at the moment, you could practically feel the tension between the two reverberate throughout the area. Ashido felt his ire rising. How dare this scum casually accuse any one of his friends of that when he didn't even know the situation? Naruto let no expression come onto his masked face. Whether he realized Ashido's cold anger or not, he continued on as if nothing was happening. "And it's not just trust and arrogance. Everyone in your species carries a sort of condemnation for anyone who is different than you. You claim to be the protectors of humans, but you hold them in the same disregard you hold for us." A crease appeared on Ashido's forehead. "And that is why you actively pursue Hollows. Your arrogance in your abilities and your condemnation of our species is what fuels stunts like this." Ashido began to growl. "You have no hope of defeating us, Shinigami. Let me make this very clear. Every single one of you will be slaughtered here. We will dance on your graves. It's what idiots like you deserve for complete stupidity." That did it. Ashido snapped. He charged at the Hollow, what little defense he had abandoned. The Hollow just stood there, relishing in the misery that he had caused to the wretched Shinigami. Naruto slowly relaxed himself into a stance, ready to take the Shinigami head-on. He was a little surprised when the berserk Ashido nearly managed to break through his guard. Ashido's attacks had strength, but they also had experience far more than any other Shinigami he had faced. He managed to block over a dozen sword strikes with his tail, taking small scratches on it as he did. But one attack slipped through his guard, and caught the Hollow on the hip. Naruto hissed out in pain, but was already on his feet. He went towards the left side of Ashido, hoping to use that as a feint. Ashido switched his position to avoid Naruto, but that was exactly what the hollow was hoping for. Naruto's strong paw managed to catch Ashido's right arm and the Zanpakuto that was holding it. He thrust the limb out to the side, jolting the rest of the Shinigami. But Ashido was ready for this. He took his free hand and extending his middle and index finger, aiming them directly at the hollow. It was a slow motion on his part, almost lazy, but it could instill fear in the hearts of many opponents. Sure. Hada number 4, Byakure 2. Naruto avoided the brunt of the lightning bolt by releasing Ashido, but his right shoulder was singed from the attack. He kneeled down momentarily, instinctively clutching the wound. It turned out to be a bad mistake on his part. The Shinigami had recovered the use of his right arm, and was now going in for the finishing blow. But it was of no use as Naruto's tail shot out and caught him on the left side. Ashido hit the ground with a hard thud, though he was fortunately spared of any broken bones. He shakily got to his feet. The hollow was now sporting a wide grin on his face, like nothing had happened at all. He glared at the trickster. He could see it now. He had purposely left himself open so he could go for that tail strike. He had to admit, it was his first time that he had fought a hollow that used such underhanded tactics. Usually hollows were just attack, eat, repeat. But this one had crossed all boundaries he had had for expectations. He looked around him. There were not that many Shinigami dead, though even he knew that staying here long enough would cause all of them to die. Even if their mission was to eliminate the hollow menace, finding suitable shelter should be their top priority. Ashido's hollow opponent sneered. This fight was dragging out for too long. He had a plan to upkeep, and couldn't hold it if this continued to progress. He looked over to his right, seeing a particularly large hollow fighting a short Shinigami. Naruto grinned to himself as he saw an opportunity arise. He rushed over to the fighting pair, which left Ashido temporarily stunned. Speaking of the fighting pair, both of them now noticed the fox hollow coming at them. The short Shinigami braced himself for impact, inadvertently leaving himself open to attack from the other hollow. The Shinigami was surprised as the fox hollow went not for him, but for the hollow that he was currently fighting. The fox completely passed him up, knocking the other hollow away with a single strike. The short Shinigami looked up to see the face of his best friend, Ashido, who now had a look of realization on his face at the new individual. Their reunion was cut short as a strong claw gripped the back of his robes, lofting him upwards. The hollow wrapped his front paw around the Shinigami's neck, claws poised to strike at any moment. A bead of sweat ran down the Shinigami's face as he grew nervous. He was already injured, so there was no way he could have fought off the hollow even before it had grabbed him. He looked over and saw Ashido gripping his Zanpakuto until his knuckles turned white. He was clearly contemplating the situation at hand. Then he felt the hollow's disgusting hot breath wash over his entire soul. It sent shivers down his spine, and that was not something that could be easily done. When Naruto spoke, it was addressed not to the captured Shinigami, but to Ashido. "Drop your Zanpakuto, or this one dies," he stated simply, digging his claws into the victim's neck for emphasis. Both Shinigami's eyes widened. A hostage situation? They were obviously thinking that something as savage and primitive as a hollow would ever think up something like that. "Ashido, forget about me. Just kill this hollow," the captured Shinigami said weakly. The claws were clearly getting to him. "What are you saying?" "You know I can't do that," shouted the redhead. His expression was contradictory to his resolve, as he openly looked indecisive. "You have 30 seconds, said Naruto, butting in on their little conversation. Ashido began. 15 seconds. Ashido raised his Zanpakuto. 10 seconds. He lifted it up. 5 seconds. And he prepared to. 3, 2, 1. Clang. Ashido's Zanpakuto fell to the ground with a deafening clang. His best friend was now unconscious, but the wide grin on Naruto's face just got wider. "Kick it away," he demanded. Ashido did just what he was told. The deadly blade now lay useless 20 feet away from the fighters, and Naruto dropped Ashido's friend roughly. Before anyone could react, Naruto was on Ashido himself. The Shinigami attempted to block, but without his Zanpakuto it wouldn't do any good. Naruto and Ashido slid across the ground, digging a trench and lifting up much rock. The hollow's head was delivering a nasty blow to Ashido. He completely slammed Ashido into a tree, which made him spew blood in the process. Ashido at this point was barely conscious, and it wouldn't take much more. The hollow released his head, allowing Ashido to fall a little. But this was not in Ashido's favor, as he was nailed at point blank from Naruto's tail. That blow did the trick. The Shinigami was knocked out, and Naruto caught the unconsciousness Shinigami by draping him across his back. With Ashido on his back, the hollow began to walk back towards the other Shinigami. He sneered in disgust as he looked at the scrawny Shinigami. He would not be a good meal, even if Ashido would make up for it. He duly noted the Zanpakuto at the hip, before nudging it away. These Shinigami truly were weak if anything should happen to their Zanpakuto. None too gently, he hoisted the Shinigami onto his back, claws sinking into the flesh. He looked around and saw that the other Shinigami had retreated away, probably due to the hollow's superior numbers. And speaking of the hollows, one of them nearly just took a huge chunk out of both Naruto and Ashido. The intelligent hollow jumped back, cursing that his instincts had dulled. His eyes widened as every single hollow there began to lock on him. Naruto looked at the Shinigami. They were likely the reason that he was being targeted so much. He cursed his own stupidity. Why the hell didn't he pay better attention to his surroundings? He was a ninja in life, for God's sake. He avoided another strike from an insect hollow. He couldn't fight them now, so he would have to simply avoid them. He ran through the line of hollows, taking quite a few blows, but not allowing any fatal ones to go towards the two Shinigami. He took them all head-on, plowing through the defense of the weak hollows, sending several flying into the air. He didn't spare them a second glance as he clumsily leapt onto one of the branches of the trees. The remaining hollows stood there stupidly as they watched the small hollow rocket its way through the Menos forest on the treetops, carrying two unconscious Shinigami with it. From the high quartz trees of the Menos forest, you can see everything for miles. The locations of Menos Grande, other hollow, and hollow hideouts could be seen. Unfortunately, you had to be a very agile hollow or have some sort of climbing ability to even think about getting up there. The trees were steep, and the smooth quartz could be slippery at times. However, Naruto was a very agile hollow. With his size and body structure, he could easily climb the trees of the Menos forest. The problem was trying to do that with two unconscious Shinigami on his back. He had nearly fallen a half-dozen times, which prompted him to think if he should just abandon the Shinigami. He shook such thoughts out of his head as he prepared to land on a particularly large branch. He let the two Shinigami fall from his back onto the branch. He looked them over, before adopting his usual look of hatred. "You know, if I didn't need you two, I would have slaughtered the both of you back there." He paused for a moment to glare at Ashido, despite knowing that he couldn't hear him. "And if I was actually trying to kill you, instead of just trying to knock you out, you wouldn't have lasted a minute in that fight, Shinigami. Even if you are the strongest Shinigami I've fought, I'm not exactly the same hollow I was a month ago." He allowed himself to smile arrogantly at the thought, before resuming his task. "Unfortunately, I need you two for a very particular task. I'm sure they will be very pleased to see you." He turned away from the two Shinigami to look away at a very dark expanse of the Menos forest. He glanced back at the Shinigami before smiling very sadistically. The dark expanse is somewhat of a forbidden area throughout this sector of the Menos forest. It wasn't through any sort of law or code. Just an unspoken rule. Even the mindless hollows instinctively knew to stay away from that place. The dark hole was like a permanent authority to the denizens of the Menos forest, and almost every hollow knew what lurked in there. Going in there was the equivalent of suicide. Despite this, Naruto looked on defiantly, as if he were ready to challenge this dark mass. Even now he was getting dangerously close to the place. No normal hollow would dare venture out this far. It wasn't easy to get here either. Even though hollows never went in, it didn't stop them from completely crowding around the surface, which made ground entry impossible. Which is exactly why he had taken to the trees. As luck would have it, the particular branch he was on jutted out severely, forming somewhat of a natural entrance. He situated the two Shinigami on his back again, and squatted down in preparation for a jump. Off the forest floor, a select few hollows witnessed the fox hollow leap fearlessly into the abyss. They made a few mindless grunts, almost in fear and admiration. They then saw him drop to the forest floor, making almost a kind of beckoning gesture with his tail. One of the hollows approached the darkness slowly, as if it were afraid that it would consume him. He reached out a foot and stepped inside. The fox hollow smiled ruefully at the success. On their friend's action, the other few hollows stepped into the darkness, and were soon progressing deeper. Pretty soon, they were all following the rapidly disappearing figure into the darkness. It was a quiet atmosphere in the darkness. The only sounds that could be heard were the distant cries of hollows and the noises of little hollow animals. But even those noises were drowned out by the moving near-silent form of Naruto. It was truly unnerving. After being surrounded by nothing but hollows, seeing an absence of them could be quite startling. The way twisted and turned, and even the unshakable quartz trees looked warped here. They created obstacles, and Naruto once again jumped into the trees for a better route. It wasn't long before he reached the center of the expanse. Below, on the forest floor stood an almost beehive-like structure, a monolith in the center that gave an ominous feel. Even the trees, with their unyielding size, seemed to avoid it. Naruto wasn't deterred. He leapt from the tree, falling to the cold, hard ground. He walked up to the side of the structure and placed a paw on it. It was cold, and made of rock. There were numerous holes on it that he could probably squeeze through. He gripped the outside of one of the holes, and swung himself through. It looked like he was small enough to fit through. He crouched at the edge of the tunnel, and that was where he saw them. Around 10 Ajuchas, very low-level ones, but not the type to piss off in this area of Huecomundo. They were sitting in a circle, huddled around a light giving off from a bioluminescent Ajuchas. They had not noticed his presence yet, his Ryatsu weak enough to be overlooked and the light dim enough to hide his position. They were apparently talking, though he couldn't make out any words. He placed his paw on the rock face, before a very small section broke off and gave. Naruto cursed and hid himself from view, before he gradually lifted up his head to view. Thankfully, they were still talking animately. But then suddenly, a large green Ajuchas appearing in the rock next to him. It aimed a powerful fist at him that he just barely avoided. He tumbled from the hole, whirling into the center. The other Ajuchas bristled, but otherwise gave no indication that they never knew he was there. He looked at his back, and saw the Shinigami barely remaining in place. The other Ajuchas were rising to their feet, clearly excited by their visitor. Naruto watched on as a large, humanoid Ajuchas with a perpetual smiling face took up the front. "Well everyone, it looks like we've got ourselves a visitor," the Ajuchas cackled with mirth, the others around him copying. Naruto was started to regret his plan. Trying to fight off a score of Ajuchas who probably wouldn't even give him the time of day wasn't the best idea. That particular sentiment was confirmed as the green Ajuchas from before came soaring in, throwing a punch that would undoubtedly knock him out and allow the hollows around to feast on his innards. Reflexively, his long tail wrapped around the weaker Shinigami, pulling him straight into the line of the Ajucha's fist. The Ajuchas tensed for a moment, then retracted its fist just before it punched straight through the meat shield. Naruto grinned. There was no way that the Ajuchas would obliterate their most coveted meal. "Great Ajuchas, I bring you all a gift," said the normal hollow, his sarcastic patronizing tone seen through by everyone there. "Interesting," said the leader as he held back the green Ajuchas. Naruto would bet a pretty penny that his masked smile got a lot bigger. "But coming to us deliberately is the smartest thing to do, little hollow. What stopped us from simply killing you and taking the Shinigami? The leader asked. The leader watched on in silent amusement as the hollow placed the Shinigami on the ground, before situating his fangs right above the torso of the Shinigami, ready to tear into the flesh. The other Ajuchas looked almost offended by this action, but he wasn't perturbed at all. This hollow was different. He was intelligent, but that was only part of the equation. His own swarthy eyes stared into Naruto's scathing ones and could pick out shrewdness, ruthlessness, and even triumph. I think you can figure out what this means. Naruto didn't let his guard down even when he was talking. Now, what I want is simply information. If you can give me that, then I'll give you these 2 Shinigami. And I know how much you want to eat them. The Ajuchas looked mutinous for a moment, but they weren't willing to give up a chance to eat Shinigami. Fine, then. What do you want to know? Asked the leader, his voice holding a tone of resignation. First of all, how do I escape the Menos forest and get back to the surface? The Ajuchas around them sniggered, though both Naruto and the leader ignored them. The nearest exit is a narrow tunnel around 1 mile north of here. The thing is, it is located on a high cliff, so unless you can climb the trees, you won't be getting to it. Naruto nodded, taking time to process the information before asking his next question. Is there some kind of great power in Hueco Maybe an army or a kingdom or something like that? The leader Ajuchas was about to speak, but Naruto cut him off. Who also hates the Shinigami? The Ajuchas in the room burst out laughing, leaving Naruto embarrassed but also boiling in rage. What's the matter, kid? You got a little vendetta against the Shinigami, or what? Jeered one of the other Ajuchas. The tone of sardonic glee was evident in the voice. Yeah, I do. What's it to you, huh? Asked Naruto. They all laughed again, insulting Naruto's strength, intelligence, and sanity. Okay, settle down, said the leader with a small chuckle. He was clearly amused too by Naruto's proclamation. For the record, little hollow, there is something like what you're talking. Hollows from all over go to this place, to become part of this great army. Those that do receive excellent meals, living standards, and glory. But, you have to be powerful, otherwise they won't accept you at all. Even we only have an extended connection to the place, even though we've tried to make it official many times. As far as I know of, its existence is unthreatened in Hueco. It stands as a great palace that can be seen from hundreds of miles away. And it rules over most of the territory I've explored. What's its name? Asked Naruto. The Ajuchas grinned. Los Noches. His ears twitched when those words came from the Ajucha's mouth. Los Noches. The name was strangely poetic in a way. Los Noches. The way it rolled off the tongue in the smoothest manner was both beautiful and intimidating. Whoever came up with it had great naming sense. When he heard the Ajuchas finish talking, Naruto never took his eyes off the leading Ajuchas, or his mouth off the flesh of the Shinigami. To do so would be suicide, because he knew they would pounce the second he did. The leading Ajuchas stood there reluctantly, a forced smile on his face. The fox hollow was glaring at him, and the expression on his face conveyed that he could get defensive. The dim light of the hive didn't give away the leader's full expression, but it was probably one of barely contained anxiousness. A fine meal was right in front of him, and if he didn't play his cards right, it could be taken away from him. The hollow did not want to answer any more questions, and simply wanted to get on with the meal. Where can I find this Los Noches? Asked Naruto, his voice morphing to a practical, calculating tone which was in contrast to his normal, psychotic one. There was a faint tone of nervousness present, judging from the way his voice cracked slightly. The Ajuchas paused for a moment, as if he were debating to answer the question, or simply attack instead. The fox hollow was no match for him, but he could very well finish off the Shinigami before he died. The other Ajuchas were now chanting dumbly, which was grating on the mind. He would have to decide quickly, lest he wait and carelessly make the wrong decision. With a strained voice, he finally said, "Once you get back to the surface, walk around 10 miles to the east of here. At that point, the Grand Palace of Las Noches should come into view. You'll know it when you see it. It has a domed roof and 4 tall pillars flanking it. Naruto nodded slowly, not really caring if they were lying or not. If he was, then he would simply find someone else to fulfill his needs. His confidence in getting away safely didn't waver in the slightest. The minnows were still eyeing the 2 Shinigami that he was keeping hostage. He had no more questions, those could be saved for when he arrived at Las Noches, but that didn't mean he could casually release the prey in front of 10 hungry Ajuchas without getting caught in the crossfire. So he defiantly kept his perpetual glare on the leading Ajuchas. He couldn't just abruptly walk away from the Shinigami, as doing so would likely startle them. He would have to do it slowly and subtly, all the while making sure that he kept his distance. In a slow yet smooth motion, Naruto panned his eyes to the left, leaving the gaze of the leader Ajuchas while still keeping a close eye on the Hollow's actions. He watched all of the Ajuchas carefully, and after what seemed like an eternity, he stepped away from the fallen Shinigami and closed his mouth. The effect was instantaneous. Once Naruto's jagged teeth were out of the equation, the Hollows flew into action. All rationale was forgotten as the Ajuchas clambered over their comrades. The leader got the first bite. Once Naruto had backed away, the large Ajuchas spasmed forward at the Shinigami in a split second. He didn't hesitate, and tore through the skin and sinew of the smaller Shinigami. The other Ajuchas had arrived, eager to get their own shot at the food. Every one of them fought its way to the front of the line, ripping off pieces of flesh if need be. One of the larger Ajuchas tore into the chest cavity of Ashido, while the leader dined on the abundant muscle of the smaller Shinigami. Both of the unconscious Shinigami never woke up, as they were killed instantly by the gruesome deeds of the Hollows. Blood spurted from the carcasses, drenching their hollow masks with the fluid. Limbs were ripped cruelly from bodies, leaving with a disturbing tearing noise. The muscle gave way to reveal the internal organs, which were also devoured without hesitation. Even the bones were eaten away by the Ajuchas, being just as nourishing to Hollows as the rest of the body. The leader, being the most capable of controlling his hunger, kept out a watchful eye during the entire meal. The Fox Hollow was attempting to sneak away during the feast, and if anything, he was doing fairly successful, having eluded the attention of nearly every Ajuchas. Except him, of course. Naruto stumbled through one of the holes in the rock, hoping to get away before the Ajuchas turned their attention on him. He had seen the way they ate, and that had personally surprised him. Not the viciousness mind, but the way they seemed to lose all semblance of control once food was in the area. The tunnel he was crawling through wasn't very long, only about 20 feet in length. Hopefully, he could quickly leave the Ajucha's nest and escape into the darkness before they finished their meal. And if that didn't work, well, he just hoped that the backup plan would. Desperately, he pulled himself along, uncaring that the rough surface of the rock was making his skin raw. The old life over limb saying would have been perfect for the situation. As he neared the exit, he felt the sense of relief course through his body. The outside world was becoming more vivid. At least as vivid as it could in this darkness. He was just about to reach the exit when he felt a strong blow hit his backside, rocketing him forward out of the hole. He skidded along the ground, friction causing even more wounds for the poor Hollow. He had landed a good distance away from the Ajucha's hive, but was still a ways away from the total darkness of the abyss. The injured Hollow struggled to his feet, coughing a few times as he did. Blood trickled down from his forehead and flowed into his angry eyes, and Naruto was barely able to see what was in front of him. The dust had gathered into the air, initially creating little more than a distorted, hazy figure around 25 feet away. Then the dust began to clear, and Naruto felt that both of his offerings had been a waste of time. Standing across from Naruto was the leader Ajuchas, his masked smile stretched out even more than usual. There were a few splotches of what appeared to be blood splattered all over his mask, no doubt from his recent meal. The other Ajuchas were nowhere to be found, but that did not lessen the visible threat in the slightest. Naruto shook some debris off of him, before the large Ajuchas opened his terrible mouth and laughed. A hideous mixture of saliva and blood flew from the mouth, which made the scene even more disgusting. The laugh was loud and raucous, and also had an arrogant tone that reverberated throughout the area. The Ajuchas stopped laughing and turned his head towards Naruto, still smiling a toothy grin. Naruto relaxed into his fighting stance, but the Ajuchas didn't go on guard at all. "You're quite the sneaky little hollow, aren't you? So eager to save your own skin that you do it in such a roundabout way. Those cowardly yet intelligent actions are perfect for your appearance," the Ajuchas started, eyeing Naruto's fox-like features. "You're going to need more than a couple of Shinigami to get away from us, though," said the hollow conversationally, though his words sent Naruto on edge. A bead of sweat ran underneath his mask, and Naruto felt a sense of shameful fear enter his being. Unacceptable for a creature made from fear. "Unfortunately for you, I have the most self-control of anyone in our little group. Though you managed to distract the other Ajuchas long enough to get away, something as minor as that would not work on me. You are an idiot to even think about coming to us and getting out alive," the Ajuchas continued, his words imprinting upon Naruto's consciousness. "Bringing 2 Shinigami to our hive in order to appease us will not spare you. I only answered your questions because I didn't want to risk the precious food. However, just because I ate does not mean I'm willing to let more food just walk away unharmed," he explained. The Ajuchas then stopped talking and sauntered his way over to where Naruto was standing. Naruto attempted to move, but the Ajucha's Ryatsu was making it difficult. No matter how strong he was as a normal hollow, he wasn't ready to take on a full-fledged Ajuchas. If he wasn't mistaken, this battle would go just like fights with Orochimaru when he was just a green genin. His eyes darted around the area, searching for any sort of possible escape route. The Ajuchas would be able to cover all of the ground area, and it would be impossible to escape with his inferior speed. Taking to the trees seemed like the best option, though if it turned out the Ajuchas could climb them then he was fucked. He was too careless, as the Ajuchas seemed like it was ready for another meal. The puny hollow didn't notice him slink ever closer, like a lion ready to attack, yet not so obvious that it would put the prey on edge. But he didn't strike immediately, he liked to play with his food first. It was too late when Naruto noticed the Ajuchas was closer. He was already in range. His keen senses sent him on even more alert, and the raw essence of primal fear wormed its way through his body. His animal instincts were telling him to run, but his body didn't obey. It was an odd sight, Naruto still in a fighting stance, but so afraid of the adversary in front of him. He was confident in his offering beforehand, but without it he realized how foolish and arrogant his plan had been. The Ajuchas touched his mask lightly with his hand, forcing the younger hollow to look at him. "This is a dog-eat-dog world, little hollow. You're not a human anymore. You're a hollow, and you are in Hueco There are no laws, no punishments, and no order. We are animals. Animals that must eat everything weaker than them in order to survive. There is no negotiation when it comes to food," the Ajuchas explained. The Ajuchas let go of his face, before lining up his fist to begin pummeling Naruto. He registered the pure attack speed the Ajuchas had, as it had easily breached through his defenses. He felt agonizing pain in his side, and as he looked down he noticed a good-sized chunk of flesh missing. The Ajuchas had bitten it clean off. The pain jolted Naruto out of his fear, and he admonished himself for the mistake. God, he was pathetic. He had been in dozens of fights with stronger opponents and had never been afraid of them. If he was a hollow, he should act like one. He pushed off the ground, using a little Ryatsu to increase the elasticity of the ground. When he had put himself out of attacking range, he clutched his side, getting blood all over his hands. He kneeled down, hoping to get some reprieve, but the other hollow would have none of that. He threw a heavy punch that caught Naruto's mask. Amazingly, the white material wasn't even dented from the assault, but the same couldn't be said for its wearer. The fox hollow flew back what must have been 50 feet, his tail waving wildly in the air as he flew. The Ajuchas used a primitive form of sonido to appear at the hollow before he hit the ground. He grabbed Naruto, and clutched the smaller hollow, squeezing him and bringing him closer. This forced Naruto to be face to face with the Ajicha's mask, which was grinning deviously at him. No way, he's at such a high level, thought Naruto weakly as he was suffocated by the hollow's hot, putrid breath. The Ajicha's spiked forearms were digging into his skin and was making the experience all the worse. When you're this weak, there's no way that Lost No Chase would let you into their army. I'd give up on that dream of destroying the Shinigami, and simply resign yourself to becoming my food. Though their little skirmish was over, the Ajichas continued to enjoy taunting Naruto. It had barely lasted 30 seconds. Give up, give up, give up. Those were the words that ran through Naruto's mind, and the only words that he actually registered from the Ajichas. He had heard those words many times throughout his life, and had heard them far more than he would have liked to. The two despicable words that he loathed being told. Give up. His lip curled, and cruel teeth poked into view underneath his mask. He defiantly glared at the Ajichas pinning him down, just as tenacious as he has always been. His eyes slanted in a glare, and his face was gaunt. There also seemed to be a rise in temperature, as if Naruto's fiery rage was almost palpable. This bastard was crushing his ambition underneath its red fist, ripping it apart, and then burying it underneath the sand the Huecomundo. All because he believed the fox too weak to be able to accomplish it. Naruto wasn't prepared to let that go freely. Don't ever tell me to give up, he shrieked, beginning to pry himself free from the Ajicha's grasp, as if he were overcome with a burst of strength. He shifted a little more, and pushed on the Ajicha's arms. The Ajichas seemed to gawk in amusement as he watched Naruto resist, but when he felt Naruto begin to push harder and harder, his smirk turned into a frown. He was stunned that this puny little hollow was overwhelming him. In response, he tightened his grip on Naruto. Said hollow gave a weird cross between a moan and a roar, and put even more force on the leader's arms. Veins were bulging on both adversaries as they struggled for dominance. Neither one would give up, though the Ajichas felt that it would be hopeless very soon. Such thoughts were not present in Naruto's mind, and the hollow's rage and strength only increased as time passed. What? Yelled the Ajichas as his arms finally yielded to the younger hollow. Naruto hovered in the air for just a split second, though it felt like an eternity for the two of them. He took advantage of the situation, and brutally brought down his sharp claws right on the Ajicha's mask. The red Ajichas howled in pain, 3 claw marks present on the right side of his mask from where he was struck. A large chunk of mask was missing from the right side of his mouth, letting Naruto get a slight glimpse of his bare face. Naruto collapsed onto the ground, finally feeling the grievous injury in his side. He was breathing heavily, and his adrenaline-filled rage was now all but forgotten. The wound was getting to him, and he didn't know how long he could keep this up. The Ajichas clutched his wounded face, all the while flailing his fists around randomly. He peered through his finger and noticed a white chunk of material on the ground in front of him. Intrigued, he bent over and picked it up, studying it closely while rolling the piece of bone mask around in his hand. And then, he paled. Naruto had just rolled over on his side when he heard a loud, drawn-out yell emanate from across the clearing. He jolted upright and winced when his side wound began to protest. There was the Ajichas, looking at his hands in horrified disbelief, standing some distance away from him. The white piece of mask fell to the ground, and Naruto felt the tension rise ever higher when it emitted a clattering noise. The Ajichas turned to look at him afterwards, and Naruto felt himself freeze. Upon the Ajicha's face was the coldest, most evil look of pure rage and hatred that he had ever seen in his life. No human could ever reproduce that look. He stared in shock at the missing chunk from the Ajicha's mask. Once he cleared his petrification, he tilted his head to the side in confusion, not understanding what the Ajichas was getting so worked up over. The Ajichas was at him in an instant, his speed increasing dramatically. He mercilessly kicked Naruto away, sending him skidding along the ground. The friction from the force of the blow caused the sharp, jagged rocks to cut through Naruto's thick skin, making it raw and bleeding. The Ajichas gave Naruto no time to recover, and was once again at Naruto's side. He placed a heavy punch straight into Naruto's gut. The smaller hollow coughed up a waterfall of blood, flying to the side again, before the Ajuchas flashed behind him and picked him up by the fur. The Ajuchas leaned his face even closer, eyes boring into Naruto. Naruto tried some feeble attempts to get away, but unsurprisingly, the bigger hollow refused to budge. Naruto's tormentor walked over to the nearest quartz tree, Naruto in tow. He held the fox hollow at arm's length for a moment, before brutally slamming his opponent straight into the quartz. It was in a manner reminiscent of Ashido's torment, but this time the Ajuchas ground Naruto against the rock, causing even more serious injuries to the wounded hollow. One of Naruto's more serious wounds caught on a jutted-out piece of quartz. Amazingly enough, Naruto hung suspended on it, his layer of open flesh and sinew painfully keeping him up. The battered hollow attempted to look away, but his face was grasped by the Ajuchas, forcing Naruto to look at him. His eyes were almost swollen shut, but he could still see that the Ajuchas' cold fury had not dissipated in the slightest. "Look at me," he said simply, as he forced Naruto's eyes onto his partially broken mask. The pure venom behind the voice was staggering. Would he be capable of that much hate as an Ajuchas? "Do you see what you have done? Your little rampage broke my mask. You should very well know what happens when an Ajuchas has his mask broken." The Ajuchas' cold rage was morphing, becoming a purely angry rage similar to Naruto's. He thrust Naruto against the tree again, still not satisfied. "I can never evolve into a Vasto Lorde. You have permanently stunted my evolution by keeping me as an Ajuchas forever," the now permanent Ajuchas exclaimed. He dropped Naruto, allowing the hollow to crumple pitifully at his feet. He gave one final well-placed kick to Naruto, before turning away from him. "I'm going to kill you now, you understand? This game has gone on far enough, and your very existence is insulting to me," stated the Ajuchas, more to himself than to Naruto. The Ajuchas turned back around when he heard a grunt from Naruto. Naruto's skin was no longer capable of holding him aloft. The small bit of flesh ripped itself from Naruto's body, in order to continue hanging on the quartz. Naruto fell to the ground, lying at the Ajuchas' feet. He desperately attempted to get up, but his body was not responding to his tries. The Ajuchas noticed that Naruto was completely at his mercy, and despite his condition, tried to smile. It came out as more of a sneer instead. "Die," he hissed loudly, as he bent down in order to begin eating the hollow. Just as the angry hollow was about to end it, a strange rumble shook the area, causing the Ajuchas to look around in confusion. Little pebbles were convulsing back and forth, making the scene look almost like a natural sequence. Naruto managed to smile despite his injuries. It worked, he thought in amazement as the rumbling became more pronounced. And then, almost ominously, it stopped. Only the shrill cry of a distant hollow rang through the landscape, and Naruto and the Ajuchas stood mystified at what happened. From the darkness spewed hundreds of normal hollows, coming forth into the clearing like a swarm of brutal insects. Howls, roars, and other animalistic cries shook the trees, and agile hollows leaped from the tops of trees in mass number, eager to join the rest of the hollows. The present horde moved closer to the hive, more hollows becoming visible as space was made free. The Ajuchas leader looked around in terror as he saw hollows in all directions getting closer, rapidly blotting out any visible ground or escape routes. He was so immersed in the situation at hand that he didn't notice Naruto limp away. The hollows were unyielding in their destructive trek, and the Ajuchas found out that he was running out of luck, and fast. He gutted the first hollow, before barely dodging a strike from another one. Using his superior speed, he rushed through a line of hollows, killing dozens while taking dozens of injuries. Fortunately for him, his thick skin held out for him, and he was left with fairly minor wounds. But he was getting overwhelmed. Two hollows crouched below and bit into his legs, causing the Ajuchas to buckle and kneel to the oppressive force. Nearby hollows started frothing at the mouth at the prospect of such a large meal, and a huge mass of hollows converged from the horde, becoming a crowded circle of hungry hollows and one unfortunate Ajuchas. There came a tortured scream from the center of the mass of flesh, and red limbs and organs flew everywhere. An explosion of blood erupted from the center, spraying everything a good 5 feet away from it. The hollows folded back in line, almost like a swarm of ants. The non-eating hollows paid them no mind, and simply continued on. The hollows at the front lines worked their ways into the holes of the hive, one after the other. After many hollows brazenly entered the hive, screams could be heard coming from inside. Sounds of ripping flesh dissipated as the other Ajuchas emerged from the hive, looking worse for wear but otherwise able of beating their opponents. But there was nowhere for them to go, except for the sea of hollows before them. The normal hollows were at their heels, putting all of them in a pinch. A few excess hollows coming from the rear began nipping at their heels, which caused all the Ajuchas to inadvertently fall one by one to their deaths. The hollows below wasted no time in getting to their food, each one eager to get their own shot. Even their hollow allies coming from the hive were not spared, and were ripped apart and eaten as well. When the last Ajuchas fell to his death, all was silent. However, nearly 1 minute later, a rustling noise occurred as another figure wormed his way out of the hive. From the cavern came the last surviving Ajuchas. It was a small Ajuchas, around the same size as Naruto and with brown skin. He vaguely resembled an upright insect, with the corresponding antennae, thorax, and abdomen. But the body was too warped for it to be actually considered one. It had a single tail underneath, made of large, round segments. On the end of the tail there was a rather nasty-looking stinger, made of a jade-green crystalline substance. His mask was also insectoid, with the deep, sunken eyes and lack of other facial features. The stinger gave off a green glow, but it wasn't the only luminescent thing. The hollow's antenna also glowed, and so did the large area of crystalline substance that it had all around its torso. There were splotches of blood all over his body, but he was completely unharmed. It was almost unnatural to view. One by one, the surrounding hollows edged closer to the Ajuchas. There was a faraway look in their eyes, almost like the luminescence was luring them. After he had escaped, Naruto took to the treetops again, which was naturally the route that had barely any hollows in it. Sure, he came across one or two hostile ones, but they were nothing he couldn't handle, even seriously injured. As he forced himself onto an outlying branch, he began to ponder his approach. He had been lucky, he realized that now. He had hoped to lure some hollows into the darkness as a fail-safe, but what had produced that big of a horde? He didn't dwell on it though. What's done is done, and if he stayed around for too long they would likely catch up to him. After around 2 hours of climbing, he once again reached his cave. This time, he had gotten there with much more than minimal trouble. He squeezed into the crevice of the cave, contorting his body in order to fit. It wasn't a very long tunnel, and within seconds he reached a much larger area. It was about 30 feet in diameter, enough of a suitable living space for the young hollow. There were various rock shelves along the walls, almost making it seem like a kind of barracks. A few rare scattered plants were situated along them. Naruto lied himself down on one of the shelves, glad to be back in his cave and away from danger. The area was unknown and treacherous to reach, and it was only by pure luck that he had found this little gem. Because of the isolation, he could take time to heal his wounds before starting to search for lost no-chase. Hollows didn't have to sleep at all. They could, but they didn't need to in order to survive. It was advantageous for them to say the least, as they didn't have to worry about getting killed in their sleep. Naruto adopted a quiet, pensive mood that was rare for him as he lied awake on the rock shelf. He thought about the exit to the surface, which the Ajuchas had told him about. The Ajuchas, he thought about them as well. They were so powerful. If he became one of them, surely he would be able to match the Shinigami. He was almost giddy at the thought. But luck was not on his side, as he didn't even know how hollows could become Ajuchas. Over a month of eating hollows in this place had yielded no knowledge from any of the hollows. He did, however, know how to become a Jillian, but that alternative wasn't exactly alluring. The cave was lonely, but unlike his human self, he didn't mind the solitude. He had gotten used to it in his month as a plus, and although he wished for companions, he knew it was nothing but wishful thinking in this world. What really mattered now was food, revenge, and more food. He decided to continue on with his plan to go to Las Noches. It was reckless, but since when was he one to care about risk? They probably had a mountain of Ajichas there, and maybe then he could learn how to become one. But what if they were unwilling to help him? He wasn't fool enough to believe the leader would just launch an assault on Soul Society just for his sake. But he should at least be able to enlist in their ranks and gain some power, right? Naruto roared. All these uncertainties were giving him a headache. What the hell happened to his deal with it when it comes attitude that had gotten him so far? He was Naruto Uzumaki, damn it. He didn't just sit around and think about uncertainties. He dove into action. Naruto rose to his suddenly, determined to reach Las Noches. But a spasm of pain shot through him as his wound reacted, and he grudgingly lied back down. He would go in a few days, once his damned wounds healed. This must be it, thought Naruto, as it looked at the tunnel. True to the Ajicha's words, it was indeed located on a high cliff. He had taken the auxiliary route here this time, wanting to avoid the abyss. He was now standing on a big ledge that was outside of the exit. He walked into it, taking note of the surrounding darkness. Around 5 feet into the tunnel, the path becomes slanted, and he would have to climb his way up. He was about to step on a foothold when a voice halted him. Wait! Naruto turned around at an amazing speed, trying to locate the owner of that voice. His eyes widened when he noticed a familiar hollow standing behind him, about 20 to 30 regular hollow right behind him. Naruto racked his brain, and his mind settled in on his memory of the Ajicha's hive. The fox's eyes widened. You're... He trailed off as he remembered the bioluminescent Ajichas that the others were all huddled around. He snarled and put himself on guard, in every way prepared for a fight. But the bioluminescent Ajichas calmly raised a pincer, which seriously confused Naruto. I am not here to fight you, young hollow. Rather, we are here to talk to you, explained the hollow. His voice was quiet and wispy, and seemed to release a calming aura. It reminded Naruto of Shino for a moment, until he noticed the underlying sorrow and emotion that was hidden. Whatever the case, this being did not have the personality of the average hollow. Naruto didn't drop his guard, though. You learned to do that very quickly when living in Huecamundo. For all he knew, this hollow might just be leading him into a false sense of security. Why should I trust you? Asked Naruto. Nothing changed on the face of the other hollow, almost as if he were expecting this type of reaction. In case you haven't forgotten, you're one of the Ajichas who was in that group. Yes, said the Ajichas patiently. But that doesn't mean that I was a part of that group willingly, it finished, finally letting some readable emotion onto its mask. What do you mean? Asked Naruto, curious, but at the same time suspicious. Rather than tell you, I'll show you what I mean, he said. At the same time he did, the crystalline substance on his body grew brighter, and the 20 or so hollows behind moved closer, staring at the crystals in even more of a daze. Even Naruto himself felt somewhat compelled to stare. My body acts as a lure for mindless and near-mindless hollows. Every hollow that sees the green light would be put into a daze of sorts, and from then on can do nothing but stare at the light, he explained, as Naruto shielded his eyes from the bright light. You could say that this ability would be coveted in Huecamundo, he said, and Naruto was surprised to hear a slight bitterness that he hadn't noticed before. So you were basically a slave to the other Ajichas? Asked Naruto rhetorically. He still couldn't figure just what it wanted with him though. Yes, and truth be told, I wasn't the only one under the oppression of the Ajichas, he said, all traces of bitterness gone from his voice. The Ajichas slouched suddenly, and glanced at the hollows behind him with a look of regret. This entire sector of Huecamundo was under the rule of those Ajichas, and they could not stop. Sometimes they would sneak out of their hive, and begin feasting on normal hollows. Hundreds at a time fell to their hunger. It's safe to say that almost everyone here would be happy to see them gone. What does that have to do me? Asked Naruto, tired of the other hollow beating around the bush. The Firefly hollow straightened himself, now talking in a stronger voice. Simply put, your bravado of entering the forbidden area raised the morale of the hollow. They saw your action as an attempt to overthrow the Ajichas and claim the hive. But a few rebellious hollow shouldn't be enough to cause that big of a horde. The Ajichas nodded. This is true. But I knew of the hollows' feelings and used my lure to add some more hollows into the mix. Remember, even if they're mindless, the hollows can still tell when they like something or not. The hollows behind him began to stir, as if they were agreeing with their leader's statement. The reason we've followed you is that, well, he trailed off, almost seeming embarrassed by his own words. We want to accompany you to Las Noches. Silence. Nobody said anything for likely the next minute. Naruto blinked at the sudden request, slightly taken aback by it. But he was the only one. The hollows in front of him seemed to have resolved themselves into following him. Why? The insect raised his pincers. Similar to you, I have a personal vendetta that I wish to settle. And joining Las Noches is the perfect chance for me. The hollows behind me have no real purpose, and are simply lured in by my abilities. But they would make a fine escort and a fine addition to the armies of Las Noches. Naruto shook his head. No, I mean, why would you want to follow me? You're an Ajichas and are a lot stronger than I am. The bug smiled, though Naruto couldn't see it. It's rare for someone else to share the same sentiments as yourself in the underground. And call it a hunch, but I can sense some massive potential in you. You're a hollow that is going to do a lot of good for our race. I know it. I don't want to waste such an opportunity. Naruto said nothing, but the slightly raised breathing was indication that the other hollow's words had an effect on him. So what do you say? Partners? The Ajichas held out one of his sharp pincers, clearly wanting to initiate a deal. Naruto stared at the chela for a moment, before looking at its owner. He panned back and forth between them, his black orbs showing indecisiveness, stress, and even a bit of nervousness. The fox hollow slowly raised his paw, before enclosing around the pincer. He tightened his grip, invariably digging his claws into the other hollow's skin. Partners. The Ajichas seemed to lighten up in glee as he shook the claw enthusiastically. He took the pincer away from the fox hollow and pointed at himself. My name's Furimose. Naruto Uzumaki, said Naruto, a weak smile on his face. Baragan Luzenbaron was bored. Very bored. He ruled over Las Noches, he had no enemies to fight for the time being, and his army was incredibly strong. So it's only natural that there would be nothing to do, except stare off into space and be bored. His personal guard was kneeling in two perfect lines in front of his throne. He scoffed. The bunglers. Their instincts were getting weak, no doubt the result of being away from battle for so long. Maybe he should just split his army into two and have them fight each other. That would learn them. He quickly shot down that idea. He might be arrogant, but he didn't rule all of Huecomundo, and there were still enemies that are a threat to him. The skeleton Vasto Lorde yet again rejected his servant's tea, not wanting any of it. What he did want was to fight. To experience the thrill of battle, to spill blood all over the sands of Huecomundo, and to rot some poor soul with his Respira. But, who was he kidding? He had been cooped up in the palace for far too long, so going out to battle was nothing short of an impossibility. Hell, he had even run out of hollows to put in his arena, where he and his subjects could watch them slaughter each other. If that would happen, he could actually not be bored for a change. But no, the cells were now running empty, and he couldn't locate any more hollows in the area. The old king sighed again. He just wished that something would happen. The wind skirted through the giant sand dunes of Huecomundo, lifting up the pure white sand in an unusually gentle rhythmic movement. The disturbed sand flitted over to a tiny cave entrance that made a minuscule speck on the landscape. Within its depths, a lonely mammalian snout poked its way from beyond the entrance of the cave. It moved its way farther out into the open, the rest of the face becoming visible in the moonlight. Bloodshot eyes, paranoid eyes, they were. They frantically moved to and from across the landscape, taking in all of their surroundings. They even looked to the rear, clearly not completely trusting their new companions yet. Furumo's was at the head of the new group, his pensive expression unchanged. Behind him were the other hollows, their masks showing many different expressions, ranging from broad, toothy grins to closed-mouth frowns. He vaguely wondered whether or not they were capable of feeling the emotions that were plastered on their masks. Naruto noticed that they hadn't said a word, or couldn't say a word. They distinctly reminded him of the Anbu. Silent warriors who lived to mindlessly serve their corrupt master, who often doubled as cannon fodder. Cannon fodder who are likely reaping the benefits of Kyuubi, no doubt, he thought scornfully, as images of a red-cloaked shinobi entered his mind. It made his blood boil. Those rat bastards in Konoha would pay the price, dearly. But, not now. Not with the damned Shinigami showing their faces there all the time. Konoha would just continue on living its life, romanticizing the exploits of the ninja and preaching their superficial will of fire bullshit. Never mind that they're receiving help from the beyond. Naruto paused for a moment, not daring to believe that he was actually one of them once. Only after becoming a hollow did he realize how much was needed to be sacrificed in order to maintain their reputation. So, Las Noches should come into view about 10 miles east of here, is that right? Asked Furumo's, relaying the information to the group. Naruto half-watched him as he rallied the hollows together, the luminescence brightening and dimming to match the purpose of the brainwashing. Yeah, if that Ajucha's leader can be trusted, said Naruto. Oh, I wouldn't worry too much about that. That claim that he was only distantly connected with Las Noches is false. He only said that to keep face around here. The truth of the matter is that he originally belonged to Las Noches, in its army to be exact, said Furumo's. He was. Then what was he doing down in the Menos forest? Asked Naruto, his mask conveying a look of astonishment. Furumo's smiled at him. I don't know the full details, as he was unlikely to share any personal information, but I do know this. There was an event that traumatized him during his time in Las Noches. You see, its king, Baragan Luzenbarn, has some pretty nasty habits. Falling out of his favor can have some drastic consequences. Anyway, there came a point in time where he was expelled from the palace of Las Noches. The reasons for that are unclear, but I have an odd hunch that it was a mission failure that caused it, but what's really clear is that King Baragan had tried to execute him in some way, but failed. After the incident at Las Noches, he wandered around the surface for a while, before he fell into the Menos forest through the same manner in which all hollows do. Obviously the weak hollows that exist in the Menos forest were no match for an Ajuchas. He bit and tore his way through the Menos forest, until he came across the same hive you found just days ago. He met the previous leader of the sector, to who he challenged in a battle for supremacy. But the previous leader was no match for the superior combat training of Las Noches, and within minutes he was slaughtered and replaced as leader. Naruto's ears twitched, only hearing the words superior combat training and Las Noches. He sped over to Furumo's and grabbed the larger hollow's shoulders, shaking them frantically. Is it true? You can really become that much stronger by joining Las Noches? He asked. Oh yes, the training you get there is top of the line for hollows, said Furumo's, surprised by Naruto's change in aggression, as it was the first time he had seen this behavior. He used his segmented tail to gently pry Naruto off of him, before walking ahead of the younger hollow. That's why we're going there, right? Asked Furumo's rhetorically, as he began to trek off into Huecomundo. The other hollows followed obediently. To gain power. His voice sounded particularly far away. Naruto hid a look of excitement and determination, before falling into line with the others as they began to walk in the direction of Las Noches. They didn't look back. From the darkness of the cave the party had just left, two disturbingly black, slanted eyes watched the group walk through Huecomundo, the gaze focusing particularly on Naruto. The eyes disappeared for a moment, before their owner slinked out of the cave. It was a black-cloaked, slightly hunched figure about 7 feet in height. Most of its face was obscured by the hood that it wore. Its head inclined down to the footprints the group had made, before turning to look in their direction almost sinisterly. It laughed suddenly, the pitches and tones changing abruptly, making it sound disturbing. At one moment, it would be cool and calm, and the next it would be high-pitched and distorted. "Looks like I can get that hollow to be my..." Its voice sounded calm and smooth at first, before it changed to a bizarre mix between a hiss and a buzz. "Successor," it finished as it ended its episode, acting as if nothing had ever happened. "All he needs is a push in the right direction," it said cryptically. It was strange. Naruto would say that he actually enjoyed his time with Furamos. They would talk regularly, sharing stories of both their human and hollow lives, arguing about what type of hollows are best to eat and so on. Furamos didn't seem to be too keen on the whole food thing, but even he couldn't deny his hollow urges at times. With his time in the group, Naruto would laugh regularly, as even the other hollows started to come out of their shell, doing showy tricks around the campfire that generally amused everyone present. Due to Furamos' control, not even a single fight broke out between the hollows, and hunger was not a problem, since they ran into several hollows during their trips. Naruto had truly gained companionship and, dare he say it, friends. Actual friends that didn't fill him with hatred or rage. In his mind, he wondered how long this would last. For the past few days, the small group had walked quite a ways, and with an Ajichas there, any unlucky hollow that crossed their path was a sitting duck for them. Las Noches came into view after only a day, but the hollows realized that their journey was still far from complete. It had now been a week since they left the forest, and they had still only reached the most distant outposts of Las Noches. The ones that were so far removed that they shouldn't even be considered a part of Las Noches. Naruto was about to walk the direct path to Las Noches, before Furamos stopped him. "We're going to go around these outposts and take the indirect path to Las Noches," he said. "What? Why?" said Naruto, annoyance creeping into his voice. If there was anything that annoyed him about Furamos, it was his tendency to waste time with his longer, more complicated plans and routes. Furamos looked at him. "Because there's bound to be sentries stationed along this path. Not to mention the giant sand hollow Lunaganga lives along this path. It's best to take a slightly longer path free of any danger," said Furamos a little forcefully. "Fine, fine," said Naruto exasperatedly. This wasn't the first time Furamos had irritated him. Generally, the Ajichas tended to play on the safe side, taking his time and thinking things through first. Naruto, on the other hand, recklessly clung on the dangerous side of life, being brutally decisive and preferring not to waste time. Furamos had already begun walking, the other hollows giving him a wide berth as he passed. He was walking up a fairly small hill to the left of Naruto, when a blurry, silver streak flashed horizontally along the bug hollow's torso. It was long and narrow, and for a split second nobody could tell what it was. That is, until it propelled Furamos off of the hill back into the narrow depression where Naruto stood. At the top of the hill stood an Ajichas, larger than Furamos, with long, gangly limbs and a bird-like face. There was a small tattoo on its torso, appearing to be some sort of realistic human skull. It held a stoic expression on its beaky face, showing off a very professional, non-personal demeanor. "Halt!" it cried, its authoritative voice and stature bearing a striking resemblance to a medieval guard. "If you're going in that direction, you must only be headed for the palace of Las Noches. Nobody is allowed in there without King Barragan's consent," said the bird in a monotone voice. A sentry, thought Furamos. This isn't good. If we've met a sentry out this far, who knows how many more might be on the road ahead. "Who are you to tell me what?" started Naruto, before Furamos pulled him away from the sentry and over to the side. "What are you doing? You can't challenge someone from Las Noches. There might be others around to back him up," whispered Furamos in a terse voice, pulling the fox hollow's head closer to his own. "See all those small buildings along the path?" he said, panning Naruto's head around the land. "Those are outposts for guys like him. Some are abandoned, but any one of them could have more sentries." "Well, what do you suggest we do?" asked Naruto angrily. "In case you haven't noticed, this guy's not exactly keen on letting us in." "I've got a plan on this," hissed Furamos. Just look at him. Both hollows turned around to see that the sentry had turned his attention away from them and onto a small lizard that was burrowing its way up. The sentry kept on attempting to hit it with his wiry limbs. Naruto and Furumo's turned away from it, a mutual understanding present on each of their faces. He doesn't exactly seem like the smartest hollow in the world. We just may be able to sucker our way into Las Noches, said Furumo's. Understanding lit itself on Naruto's face, as he squeezed past the fox hollow over to the sentry. Just follow my lead, he whispered to Naruto at the last moment. Furumo's picked up a handful of sand, gesturing for Naruto to do the same. He then threw the sand all over himself, making himself look dirtier and more raggedy. Naruto did the same, and somehow even the other hollows had registered that they needed to throw sand all over themselves as well. "Oh, pitch," moaned Furumo's pitifully, turning the guard's attention back to the ragtag group. He saw the big Ajuchas in the center lie down on the ground, and pretty soon the fox hollow behind awkwardly joined him, and soon after there were more than 20 hollows lying in the sand. The guard was seriously perplexed by this behavior, before he remembering that he was addressing these hollows before. "Oh yeah, as I was saying, no intruders allowed in Las Noches," he said forcefully. "But please, you must let us in to see Baragan-sama," said Furumo's quietly, subtly increasing the intensity of his light before moaning again. Naruto, despite his humiliation, moaned along with him. "Quiet. Why should I, the great Rixolo, take you pathetic weaklings to see his majesty?" he shouted, poising his limb to strike Furumo's. Somehow the limb looked like it had gotten a lot sharper. "But... shut up. Shut up or I'll kill you," Rixolo said coldly, its sharpened limb now touching the cheek of Furumo's mask. It was clear that Rixolo was not going to take pity. "Damn, looks like my powers aren't even going to slightly work in this case. Guess I'll have to try," thought Furumo's as he lowered himself even more. "But you're Rixolo, the greatest and strongest sentry to ever grace Las Noches. Surely you wouldn't kill your greatest fans, would you?" Naruto gagged. Furumo's voice had turned so sugar-coated, so patronizing that it was disgusting. How Furumo's could stand to lower himself that much was beyond him. What was even worse was that the tone of his voice said that he would kill Rixolo the first chance he got. But Rixolo fell for the comments hook, line, and sinker. The stupid hollow puffed out its chest, looking ridiculous, but at the same time so proud of himself. "I have fans?" he asked. "I know my military exploits were great, but I didn't realize that backwater hicks like yourselves would have ever heard of me." Furumo's kept up the act. "Oh yes, great Rixolo. In fact, the only reason we're here is because we wish to follow in your footsteps. Of course, none of us here believe that we could ever become anywhere near your greatness, but still we wish to try to achieve your level of greatness." Rixolo stroked his chin. "I like the sound of that. More sentries would mean more leisure time for me." The bird turned to look at the kneeling hollows, all of whom were silent now. "I wonder if Baragan-sama would let it slide just this once." Done with thinking, he pointed at the group. "Very well, then. I will take you to see His Majesty. However, you must show the utmost respect to him and to me. Is that clear?" Everyone nodded obediently. Rixolo smirked. "Good, we should go then." Despite being under Rixolo's protection, the trip to Las Noches still took several hours. And Rixolo had a special tendency to pick on Naruto the most, so the hollow in question felt his pride deflate more and more every time Rixolo would so much as look at him. Naruto of course wanted nothing more than to attack him, or insult him, but a dirty glare from Furumo's kept him in line. It was then that Naruto realized just what a foolish thing pride was. Pride was such a useless thing in Hueco because there was none. There was no honor either, and hollows here did everything they could to win. That itself was the epitome of honor in their society. "We're here," said Rixolo, stopping so suddenly that Naruto almost bumped into him. They were standing in front of an enormous, jade-green wall, reaching up hundreds of feet. Naruto could see nothing over the top of the wall except for 4 large pillars that would vaguely remind one of Muslim minarets. There was a staircase next to them, reaching up into the sky with hundreds, if not thousands of steps that seemed to lead to nowhere. Rixolo was already ascending them. "You won't get anywhere just standing at the base of the palace," he said, smirking languidly at them. Naruto was stunned. The base, he thought incredulously. True to the guard's word, the wall was actually just the base of the palace, with the inhabitable area suspended hundreds of feet off the ground. Apparently, Baragon had an extreme taste for size, as the vastness of the entire structure increased as the travelers entered the main area. For starters, there were no floors and only low walls, but some areas were higher than others, making full vision of the place impossible. Rixolo had taken them to a spot in close proximity to Baragon's throne room, so the king himself was visible from their position. Naruto's breath hitched. Here was his only chance to impress the king of Huecomundo with his drive and determination. He had better not screw it up. Speaking of Baragon, he had noticed the group as soon as they reached Las Noches, their Ryatsu being a clear indicator. He was now watching them out of his empty eye sockets, particularly focusing in on Rixolo. The group of hollows walked through the wide space that led to Baragon's throne room. Rixolo took the same position as the 24 hollow flanking the group, motioning everyone else to do the same. The entire group looked slightly nervous being in the presence of the king of Las Noches, as if a god was in front of them judging their lives and their futures. Baragon seemed pleased, and spread his arms out in a welcoming fashion. "Ah, Rixolo, back so soon. I thought I scheduled you on guard duty for the next week." Rixolo looked slightly nervous as he addressed his lord. "Yes, my liege, you did. But I found this group of hollows along the path claiming that they wished to join the army of Las Noches. I believe you will find them quite fascinating, Baragon-sama. It's not like you would disagree with me, anyway. A group that I would be interested in, eh? Good work, Rixolo. This is just the cure for the boredom that I've been enduring," said Baragon, rising to his feet. Rixolo beamed at the praise. "In fact," Baragon continued, "you've done such a good job that you need to be rewarded. Come up to the foot of my throne and I will grant you your award." Rixolo looked like he couldn't believe his ears. He murmured something giddily, before scrambling to his feet and sprinting up the side staircase to the foot of the throne. "Turn around," Baragon commanded, and Rixolo did so gladly, closing his eyes dreamily. He thought he was going to get a promotion. "Now," Baragon said as he reached into his robe and... Squelch. In a speed that no one there could register, Baragon whipped out a huge battle-axe, and proceeded to lop Rixolo's head off with a clean-cut unfitting of that type of weapon. Blood shot out of the Rixolo's neck, drenching both Baragon and his axe in red. The bell above him rang, and Rixolo's headless body fell to the ground, while the head bounced onto the ground below, still wearing the happy, dreamy expression it had when alive. Nobody made a sound. The flanking hollows didn't budge, and only Naruto looked disgruntled. Not because Rixolo had been brutally murdered, but because he felt that his chances for being accepted into Las Noches had been destroyed. Baragon sat back down, kicking the headless body below to be swiftly devoured. Stupid ant. Coming back here just because of a few hollows. I don't have any use for someone who won't follow my orders. But I suppose this is a temporary cure to boredom, he mused. Welcome to my palace of Las Noches. I trust that the claim Rixolo said about you was true. Naruto took the liberty of speaking up for the group. Yes, King Baragon-sama. Be it for a grudge, hope, or just a whim, every one of us here wishes to join your army and be full-fledged members of Las Noches. The Fox Hollow felt it was one of those rare times where he shouldn't piss off the one he was talking to, so his voice was respectful, yet filled with strength and confidence. There was some hushed whispering coming from the hollows on the side, and Naruto felt his already reduced confidence waning. Baragon relaxed his head on his head. Interesting, it seems that you're dead set on this. Yes, Your Highness. We all wish for power to change life for everyone here, and you, your majesty, are the only one capable of giving that to us. Furumo's continued on from where Naruto left off, only including his own dreams, but not Naruto's. You can get rid of our oppressors, the Soul Society, and rise to become the ruler of them as well. The entire world is open to you if I can change Hueco Baragon listened in stony silence as the insect Ajuchas continued to speak. Will you give us power? He asked, his voice adopting a gentle pleading tone. The entire room went silent for a minute, the tension and stress rising to stifling limits. But then a chuckle broke the silence. It started out soft, before rising in volume and intensity. Pretty soon, it was full-blown laughter. Baragon was laughing at them. Naruto and Furumo looked at each other and stood there with a dumbfounded look on their face as the king laughed. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. You ants. You ants, the king screeched, using the very same words he would repeat in years to come. Look around you. What do I need an increase in the size of my army for? What do I need a change for? I rule over all of Hueco. I am a god, he yelled as he continued his hysterical laughter. The bell had rang several times, and Baragon looked very intimidating standing there with his black, blood-stained cloak. Baragon settled down a bit. Listen. This army has defeated kingdoms that would make you quiver in fear. The greatest Ajuchas from all over Hueco come to join my army. We have defeated numerous settlements and taken loads of territory. Everyone who stands in our way is crushed. Baragon took a pause in his rambling. What do we need you for? He said, pointing his axe at all of them. Furumo looked like he had his spirit crushed, while Naruto was grinding his teeth in anger. What the hell do you know, you old jackass? You're just an ancient hollow, too self-absorbed in his own success to notice how the rest of the world, he yelled back, baring his teeth menacingly at Baragon. Everyone stood stock still, frozen in shock at this blatant insult to the greatest lord of Hueco. Furumo's masked jaw dropped, and the Ajuchas in Baragon's army starting shaking in fear of their master's wrath. But to their surprise, Baragon actually began to chuckle. Oh ho, we've got a feisty one here, eh? How refreshing. It seems like I may have a use for you, after all. Baragon clapped his hands. Guards, take them to the holding cells on the other side of the palace. His face darkened, the skull's eyes being shadowed. I've got a very special purpose for you. The hollows on the side of group seemed only to respond to their king's clapping, and almost immediately, they had formed a tight barrier blocking any exit except for the main one. But that too was flooded by a plethora of guards. The Las Noches insignias were tattooed all over their bodies, just in the way Rixelo's was. One seized Naruto by the arm, which prompted him to attempt to bite it. He was thumped heavily on the head for his trouble though, and was quickly overpowered. Amidst his struggling, he witnessed Furumo get overpowered as well, and the weak hollows temporarily gain their free will before being captured as well. And so they were forcibly carried away. Naruto being incredibly violent, Furumo holding a look of detached disapproval, and Baragon once again looking bored as ever. The only difference this time is that he actually had some way to pass the time. Well, it turned out that Las Noches was actually the size of a small country. There was a sandy expanse within the interior of Las Noches that had many curious oddities and illusions. There were small towns, housing quarters that looked like they served a very high-ranking officer, and an arena that looked remarkably similar to the Colosseum in Rome. Putting aside that this level of sophistication seems too high for the hollow species, the arena was the key area in this little predicament. It was placed in an area which would later become the battlefield between a human with Shinigami powers and a high-level Arrancar. But the arena itself was falling out of use due to Baragon's success. There were no more war prisoners to act as the combatants, and floors and seats were starting to get cracked, dirty, and dingy. It was the wish of Baragon, and indeed everyone in Las Noches, for the arena to host events once more. Several dozen hollows were stationed there to be the prime fighters in the arena. Of course, it was rigged so the Las Noches Hollows were generally much stronger than their opponents. And here's where it begins. The holding cells were strategically positioned in close quarters to the arena, so war prisoners could look at the arena and think about what was to come. Some even drove themselves insane with their anxiety. Due to Las Noches' immense size, it took almost an entire day for the guards to reach these holding cells, and during the intervening time they remembered to treat their captives as badly as possible. Naruto and Furumo's were beaten a dozen times, and the guards even decided to indulge themselves in a couple of the weaker hollows. And despite their injuries, they were roughly thrown into old, dingy cells that were falling into decay. Naruto grunted as his back hit the wall of the cell, having been thrown in roughly by the guards. He rushed towards the door as soon as he could, causing him to bang his head on the bars as they shut. He flew back from the door, slamming into the wall as if the bars seemed to repel him for some reason. The guards laughed cruelly at his brazenness, and took time to taunt him by hitting him from the outside of the cage, with wiry limbs and whips. Naruto attempted to bite one of the guards' hands off, but that only succeeded in making them angry. The guards gave him a sound beating, before leaving him to wallow in his pathetic misery. Naruto glanced around, and noticed everyone else was in the same predicament as he was in. The cells were subpar. Numerous stone bricks had been removed, and what looked like green slime was oozing its way down the ceiling, floors, and walls. The wrought iron bars looked deceptively old and brittle, but they shone with an unnatural green glow. He walked up to them and slowly eased his paw through the bars, only to be halted by a translucent, free-flowing barrier that was glowing the same shade of green as the bars. His face adopted a look of pellucid anger, before he slashed at the barrier with his claws. The barrier only rippled, and remained intact regardless. What was it? Was it a primitive form of Kido? Or just a Ryatsu trick put in place by Baragon? Whatever the case, it was blocking the way, and they needed to figure out how to get out of there. He tried to break the barrier for at least 5 minutes, before he vaguely heard Furumo's voice over the din. "It's no use, Naruto." Furumo stressed the futility of the action from over the unintelligent noises of the other hollows. From the exasperation in his voice, it looked like Furumo's had indeed attempted to break it too, only for the barrier to repel him just like it did Naruto. Naruto roared, recklessly throwing himself at the barrier in a crazed fashion. For the next 12 hours, the entire vicinity would be filled with the haunting sounds of roars, shrieks, and sorrowful moans. Baragon had prolonged their stay in the holding cells immensely, and the group of hollows had remained in the holding cell for a total of 3 years. Hosting an event at the arena took months to prepare as it was, but the king also put off the event to make them suffer. He had time after all, being nigh immortal. The Vasto Lorde felt extreme resentment every time he thought of hollows like that. Baragon himself started out like them, a self-righteous hollow who wished for nothing more than the betterment of their species. And the only way to do that was to ascend to the top. He evolved into a Vasto Lorde and built his empire with his own 2 bony hands. But fulfilling his dream was much harder than he originally anticipated. He recruited many strong hollows into his forces, and for the first decade or so, everything seemed to be going great. Life for hollows had genuinely improved, and he had built a sort of utopia in this barren wasteland. But it was not to be perfect. His numerous aides and advisors grew power-hungry, and after many failed coups, several of them set up their own kingdoms in previously unexplored territory to the far east and north. Even his best friend and champion Valakav deserted him eventually, and Baragon had no idea where he was now. After Valakav's desertion, Baragon's rule began to deteriorate. He learned that everyone in his kingdom weren't the righteous beings he initially thought they were. He was no longer concerned with improving conditions in Huecomundo, believing that society as a whole would fall apart because hollows were such backstabbers. And when he looked at Naruto and company, all he saw were his failures. He saw himself in Furumo's, the idealistic rambler concerned with righteousness no matter how unattainable it may be. He also saw Valakav in Naruto, the impulsive, sadistic maniac, who despite all his shortcomings was actually pleasant to be around when you were on his side. But 3 years seemed to be enough for them, and now it was time to put them in the arena. The king stood up, his personal guard flanking him as he stepped off the throne. It's disturbing how much a mere 3 years can change someone. Being trapped in an old prison to stare at the place where you'll die gruesomely isn't something you'd want to do. Never mind, you don't know when you're going there. The anxiety buildup from that is pure psychological horror. Physically, they were all right. They were fed regularly, because the entertainment of the masses depended at their performance, and of course, they didn't need to sleep. Naruto had changed the least. He was still brash, angry, and impulsive, but was more prone to fits of pure insanity. He spent most of his time staring at the arena, not fearing the place, but torn between anxiety about going there and a desire to go there and rip everything to shreds. Furumo's was gloomier and more bitter. His incarceration had caused him to lose some faith in the hollow species, and although he still wished for change, most of the time he was sulking moodily in the corner and not speaking to anyone. When Baragon entered the prison, Furumo's was doing his usual sulking in the corner and Naruto was going through a fit of insane rage, rampaging all over in his cell. The other hollows were silent. He called his guards to the front, having them silence Naruto so he could speak. Furumo's looked up barely, looking at Baragon through a half-lidded eye. The king struck a royal pose flamboyantly, almost like the others hollows didn't deserve to be in his presence. "Hello, ants. I have graced you all with my presence today because..." He stopped suddenly mid-sentence, going up the front of Naruto's cell door. The fox focused his full attention on the king, glaring into Baragon's soulless eyes. "It is time for your big debut," he whispered. The arena was probably the single biggest abomination the greatest Las Noches minds had created. It was over 2,000 feet wide and 500 feet high, more than 3 times the size of the Colosseum in Rome. Unlike the Colosseum's cumuliform structure, the arena was amorphous, making it appear like something straight out of a dream. It was lopsided and off-balance, with more material in certain areas, and it bended and twisted in an unnatural, goofy manner. Inside the arena, there were 639 spikes along the sides, 67 cages that housed hordes of hollows ready for battle, and 12 pitfall traps placed at various areas. Not to mention many other dastardly traps, hazards, and enemies. Naruto woke up in the center of the arena, having been knocked unconscious and chained to prevent a struggle. Looking around, he could see rows upon rows of stone seats, rising hundreds of feet above the playing field. And almost every available space was packed with giddy, excited-looking hollows. From guards to plebeians, from ajuchas to normal, every spectating hollow in the place was able to form a bond of kinship with each other over the entertainment of the arena, no matter how different they may have seemed. Baragon, of course, stood at the apex of the arena, his lavish balcony setting him apart from the rest of the onlookers. He stood there with a look of regal contentment, appearing haughty yet happy about this turn of events. Naruto noted that Furumo's and the others had not come to yet, and that the entire arena was focused in on him. And not just the spectators, as within the many cages around the bottom were many bulbous, black eyes that were filled with bloodlust. Not all the cages were the same size, and some looked large enough to hold Jillian, which Naruto noted with unease. Before Naruto could contemplate what was behind the cages, a small, weak little hollow even smaller than Naruto had wobbled its way over to Naruto's position. Naruto watched it warily, not taking his eyes off it even as it stopped about 10 feet in front of him. It was so weak, but it had a smirk that was so arrogant, especially as it glared at Naruto. The hollow opened its mouth, and Naruto felt himself reel back. Its voice was so loud. As it talked, its mouth moved in a perfectly circle fashion, almost like it was a megaphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, hollows and ajuchas, welcome to the 55th Las Noches Arena performance," it started, its voice echoing to all corners of the arena. The crowd of hollows didn't cheer, but instead cackled evilly at the prospect. Naruto moved even farther away. The thing's voice sounded like a circus barker with a sinus infection, and the jeers of the crowd were of many frequencies, from soprano to bass, which mixed in a cacophony. "Competing today in a spectacle of death and doom," the announcer continued. "All the way from Sector 16 of the Menos Forest, are The forest. Losers. The crowd snickered with barely repressed glee as the rest of the hollows competing started to come to, and Naruto felt himself scowling, offended at the term. The forest losers have a roster of 33 normal hollows and 1 Ajuchas, the announcer said, chuckling at the absurdly low number. The crowd jeered some more. And they were taken here to participate after a ridiculous request to join the Los Noches army. More laughter. Since they are so tremendously motivated for combat, it wouldn't hurt to introduce them to their first wave of opponents, he said as one of the cages opened automatically. When it was done creaking open, the shadows that Naruto witnessed behind the cage began to step out into the open. From within the cage emerged several hundred battle-ready hollows, each with the Los Noches insignia tattooed on their bodies. Naruto thankfully noted that there weren't any Ajuchas or even Jillian in the group. He turned around and looked at his own group. They were painfully short in numbers. Their enemies spread out in a circle around the group, and a particularly large one sauntered up to Naruto, jeering at him. The rules are simple. It's a fight to the death between the two sides, meaning there are no rules. Sneaky, underhanded tactics are permitted, and so is the use of the pitfall traps. The other gates can be opened at any time, forest losers, but I doubt there will really be the need for that, he said arrogantly. Naruto was getting angrier, but the rest of the group was too groggy to notice. And with King Baragan-sama's consent, as well as a quick prayer to his godliness, the match will begin. The announcer looked up towards his king, who nodded. The announcer bent down to pray, and the spectators and Los Noches competitors began to follow suit. We humbly thank our king and god, Baragan-Luzenbarn-sama, because we are nothing without his gloriousness. He is the reason for our life, our existence, and our livelihood. We happily follow the path he walks and eliminate any enemies he might have. We recognize that we will be nowhere near his power, but continue to follow him because he is our God, our Savior, and our light. Amen. The Los Noches hollows said their prayer so synchronized that it may as well have been choreographed. Baragan looked pleased, but Naruto looked disgusted. It was pathetic how overly reliant they were on their king. First of all, the so-called prayer was more of an oath than anything, and the fact that Baragan fancies himself a god and makes his subjects recite a prayer makes him far too arrogant in Naruto's eyes. The announcer grinned. With the prayer completed, we can move on to the main event. The announcer raised his arm in the air, almost as if it were a flag. Begin. As soon as the announcer said that word, the entire arena became eerily silent. The noises of the crowd diminished to nothing, which left the two competing sides staring each other down blankly. Furumo's and the others were getting to their feet, but all eyes were still focused on Naruto, his fierce expression unwavering even in the face of overwhelming odds. Naruto's own black orbs were focused on the big hollow in the center, who was equally staring him down. It was a fluorescent orange-looking hollow, humanoid in shape. Its mask was a withdrawn oblong square, stretching upwards almost like a crown. Its forearms were covered in a darker orange armor, and there were spikes jutting out from its ribcage. It wore nothing other than a small loincloth that covered where its unmentionables would have been. "You will die for our god," it whispered so quietly that it might have been the wind. Naruto barely picked up on it, before the big hollow disappeared from his view. Naruto jolted upright, surprised at the sudden motion. The orange hollow reappeared in his vision while tackling him, scattering the two hollows away from the rest of the competitors. They landed in a heap about 20 feet away, the increased speed of the orange hollow throwing them that far. Naruto coughed up blood onto the other hollow's body, a result of his opponent's immense weight and the spikes that were currently digging into him. He clumsily seized one of the spikes with his front paw, using the momentum to pull out the spike from his body as well as to break the one he was holding. The body spike was brittle enough to snap, and Naruto was left with a piece of it in his hand. The hollow howled in pain, backing away from Naruto to go on the defensive. About 100 other hollows had begun moving as well, immediately pinpointing the clustered group of enemy hollows. They were about to attack the weaker hollows of the group when Furumo slid himself between the two forces, sliding himself into a bizarre stance as he did. The hollows didn't stop. Furamos held out his pincers, putting one on top of the other. He warmed up the front side of his crystalline body parts to a far greater degree, angling the light so that it would only reach the incoming hollows. Peligro, he said bitterly, signifying that he didn't want to do this. Immediately, about 1/3 of the hollows present fell under the spell of Furamos' light. Desperately, they hurried over to get closer to the light, most knocking over their comrades and getting knocked over themselves. Furamos' technique left nothing but a bunch of disorientated and confused hollows on the ground. Furamos wasted no time in taking advantage of their confusion, and with his powerful pincers began hacking and slashing away at the grounded hollows, like a barbarian warrior in a bloodlust. Before anyone could even register what had happened, around 50 hollow corpses lay on the ground. Furamos stood off to the side, his head tilted down and a look of shame present on his face. "Forgive me," whispered Furamos to himself as the crowd hissed and booed at the display. The rest of the hollows noticed what had happened to their fallen brothers, and the battle intensified as more hollows entered the fray, 2 more gates being opened. Clearly they had underestimated the power of the Ajuchus, because his superior combat abilities allowed him to kill many more hollows. His ability to raise the morale of his comrades also played a role, especially compared to the Las Noches hollows who were simply doomed to march to their death. Meanwhile, Naruto was still fighting the orange hollow, who despite his pain had managed to go on the offensive. He was hitting Naruto with his huge fists, while the fox hollow was attempting to block the powerful attacks with the piece of bone he held in his paw. Naruto's superior combat abilities were too much for the hollow, and Naruto was able to exploit an opening in the physically stronger, yet dumber hollow's attack plan. As he did, he stood on his hind legs, his front ones doubling his arms. He blocked the hollow's attack with his front paws, leaning forward as he did. He then shot his front legs up into the air, catching the orange hollow in the chin of his mask. The mask cracked under the force, and the orange hollow was pushed back a good distance. Naruto whooped out a cruel laugh, before closing the distance between him and his opponent. He grabbed the fallen hollow as he reached near, and with effort hoisted the hollow over his head. He tossed the bulky hollow into the air about 10 feet before sticking his claws into the air. The big hollow landed directly on them, gravity forcing the sharp nails to drive into his vital organs. The skewered hollow choked up orangish blood from its gullet, before it weakly raised its fist to lightly punch Naruto in the face. A tick appeared on Naruto's masked forehead. "Go to hell," he yelled as he flung the mortally wounded hollow at an oncoming wave of fresh hollows. 3 hollows were killed instantly under the weight, and the rest of the group was scattered by the obstacle. His fight over, Naruto hurried towards the middle, thwarting 2 more surprise attacks by the Las Noches hollows. He stopped when he was back-to-back from Furamos, both them and their group surrounded by oncoming hollows. The boos of the crowd had started up again, and the competing Las Noches hollows laughed impishly at the cornered hollows. "What are the casualties on our side?" asked Naruto, as he kicked away an eager hollow. The hollows were getting more and more numerous, and he doubted Furamos could protect them by himself. "3, replied Furamos. "1 by a pitfall trap, and 2 more by surprise attacks." "That's so. Looks like we're going to have to watch out for the traps then. They seem dangerous." Furamos nodded. "This competition is really cruel. I can tell by looking that these hollows are just as unwilling to fight here as we are. Nobody seems to care that their own countrymen are forced to put up with this. It's sickening." Naruto frowned, his mind numb to Furamos' words. He didn't care about this place anymore, nor the hollows that were forced into the competition. They would simply be slaughtered and he would move on. "Well, whatever then. I don't give a crap about what they're doing here. We can't just fight them forever, you know. We need to find a way out of here before they bring out the Jillian and Ajuchas." "Agreed," said Furamos as he slit another throat. "But that could be a little difficult. Even if we manage to get out, there's still the fact that all of Las Noches will be looking for us." Naruto looked at the small staircase the announcer had come down. "How about we go into the crowd?" he said half-heartedly, trying to throw out an idea to Furamos. Furumosa nearly lost his balance after he heard that. That was the stupidest idea he had ever heard. Are you out of your mind? Half of the onlookers in that crowd are trained Las Noches soldiers. We'd be slaughtered before we even knew it. Not to mention Barragan is up there. Another hollow of their group squealed as blood gushed forth from its jugular vein. This was bad. Their opponents seemed to be rising in combat ability, and with that more of their number would die. It was just a suggestion, God, snapped Naruto. He was getting pretty tired of Furumo's regular mood swings. A pitfall trap activated and pulled a Las Noches hollow into the underworld. Naruto stared cryptically at it for a moment, appearing to be in deep thought. There was a loud thud after a few seconds, but that wasn't what Naruto was concerned about. His brain was getting an interesting idea. He had to be snapped out of his reverie by a heavy blow from his Ajucha's friend. What are you doing? You can't just space out randomly in the middle of a battle, Furumosa chided him. The Ajuchas was getting pretty sick of Naruto's reckless and immature behavior. Naruto didn't look bothered by that, surprisingly. Hey, Furumosa, I need to check something out, so you'll have to cover for the rest while I'm gone, said Naruto. Without even giving him time to react, the fox speedily rushed away from the fight. Furumosa's words were pounding in his ears, but he paid them no mind. More and more gates were opening, and with that more pitfall traps were activating. Naruto weaved his way through the mass of hollows. They tried to attack him, but his speed and agility was too great for them, and he slipped by easily. He heard Furumosa yell at him from a distance, and looking back he saw the horde of hollows focus their attention on Furumosa instead of him. He grinned uneasily, before sprinting up to a spot where he remembered the pitfall was. He'd make a note to apologize to Furumosa later. He pushed on the floor with his front paw, the pitfall yielding easily under the weight. The tan floor opened to an expanse of black darkness, no bottom visible in sight. Naruto grit his teeth. There was no way to see the bottom. But with their situation, they might have to chance it. He rushed back over the Furumosa, who was working extra hard to protect the group. I may have just found our ticket out, said Naruto reproachfully, knowing how Furumosa was when it came to taking risks. Well, we'd better make it quick, because I don't know how much longer we can last here, replied Furumosa. Indeed, this was true. Almost half of their group had been killed now, some of the boulder hollows taking on competition they couldn't handle. Furumosa himself had no wounds on his person, but the death of his comrades was leaving him surly. Got it. Now, here's what we do, Naruto whispered, so the other hollows couldn't pick up on his words. Furumosa shook his head ruefully. That has got to be the most reckless, stupid, and childish plan I have ever heard in my life. Just the sheer odds against us is so mind-blowing that I can't. He was cut off in his rambling by a brutal slash that traced his back. He gingerly stepped over a corpse to Naruto. But I guess we don't have any choice. Fine, we'll go along with your plan. I just hope you know what you're doing on this, he sighed. Naruto grinned, patting the wound on Furumosa's back, prompting the insect to curse him out. Yeah. Just don't worry about it. I'll be back in a while. Before he could get anywhere, two large hollows, almost twice the size of Naruto, blocked his path. There were big, ghoulish grins on their faces, and they laughed uproariously when Naruto came to a halt in front of them. Hey, where do you think you're going, little hollow, mocked the one on the left. It was abnormally thin, with a deep green color and a creepy smile on its mask. The hollows you've faced before were small time. Now that we're out, don't think that you'll leave here alive, said the one on the right. It had an old likeness to Choji, with its rotund body and squished face. Both hollows were arrogant, and something told Naruto that they didn't have the capabilities they claimed to have. This was just stupid. He didn't have time for these idiots. Naruto glared up at them, a cold anger present in his eyes. Move, he said simply. He turned back to Furumosa, and the cold look was wiped clean off his mask. Sorry, looks like I'll be delayed a bit. Try and get everyone left to hold out a little while longer. Now see here, you're about to die, so where do you think you get off making Dima? I said move. The look was back. Furumo's looked on in bewilderment, concern etched all over his face for the seemingly bipolar hollow. He'd never seen Naruto like this before. His fury seemed to reverberate throughout the entire arena as the crowd fell silent from their usual taunting. A tick appeared on the thin hollow's face. "You, don't blame us, when you die," its shrill voice yelled as both hollows lunged at Naruto. Naruto stared at the attack motionlessly, before a sick smile creeped its way onto Naruto's canine visage. Naruto moved forward at their attack, and after what seemed like an eternity, crouched in between the two oncoming hollows. He grabbed both of their limbs, and with a strong push, overpowered them and sent them both crashing into the ground. "You were so full of openings that it made me want to laugh. And you too call the other hollows small time," he hissed. Another hollow attempted to save the two grounded hollows, but he was gutted by Naruto, who hadn't even looked away from the now frightened pair. "You know, I don't take very kindly to folks who get in the way of my goal," mused Naruto, as he sucked the delicious blood off his paws. "I tend to brutalize my victims beyond recognition when that happens. Oh, I have a problem, don't I?" Naruto lightly began dragging his claws along his own face, before putting them at his victims' necks. "And I course enjoy every minute of it." Furumo's looked at Naruto, his breath hitching in his lungs. Was that really Naruto? While he knew Naruto could be brutal, he always believed that he was doing it for the sake of justice. He always believed that Naruto wanted to destroy the Shinigami so he could lead the Hollow species to a new golden age. But maybe he was doing it all for the sake of his own, misguided revenge. You shouldn't enjoy killing, and yet Naruto was talking like a sadist, relishing in his victim's fear and defeat. Had he really misjudged the young Hollow so severely? If he did, why was he darting around the arena, doing his damnedest to keep the other Hollows from reaching Naruto? "People like you should just die for my sake," continued Naruto. That was the icing on the cake. That selfish little line had just confirmed it for him. Naruto paid no attention to the fact that his monologue was being overheard by Furumo's. He was too absorbed in his own gruesome business. He grabbed the pudgy Hollow's flabby wrist, and promptly snapped it as if it were a twig. The Hollow's thick skin gave him nothing in this situation, and the fat Hollow cried out in pain. He turned to see his partner screaming in rage at Naruto, who then gave him a sadistic smile and broke his wrist as well. He grabbed two more Hollows that were trying to attack him, and casually ripped both their arms off. Ignoring the shower of blood and the screaming Hollows, he tossed the detached limbs onto his victim's laps. "Eat it," he said simply. "Eat the flesh of your own comrades." The Hollows seemed to brighten at this remark, and with gusto they began happily eating the arms of their brethren. Naruto scowled when one laughed, feeling humiliation seep into his pores. The crowd was laughing, and although it may not have necessarily been at him, it sure felt like it. He smacked the severed arms away, and the two Hollows looked up at him in protest. "This is getting us nowhere. But before I kill you, I want to see your expressions of agony," he said, as he reached down and placed his paw on their masks. Furumo's turned around to look at Naruto when he heard a shocked gasp come from all places. The Hollows in the crowd and on the field were seemingly petrified with, "What?" It wasn't fear, it seemed more like disbelief. Even Baragon looked stunned. He turned and... Holy fuck, was he seeing this right? There stood Naruto, a lone pillar standing confidently in the distance. There were two Hollows' masks in his hand, cleanly ripped off. He looked down at his victims and gasped. Faces, human faces. He seriously had misjudged the fox. He had just committed the worst act a Hollow could do, and he was smiling about it. Even other Hollows had some dignity, and would never stoop so low to do that. Naruto turned back to Furumo's, smiling. Not a malicious smile, but a happy smile. His demeanor had changed in an instant, and Furumo's was amazed at how much his mood could shift in a day. "Sorry for the delay, Furumo's. I'll get right on with it," he said, waving happily at his friend. He turned back to the maskless hollows, his image changing yet again. The agony looked 10 times worse with a human face, and if he had to be frank, it almost turned him on. He thrust his hands into their abdomens, taking hold of their intestines. Their faces widened and contorted in expressions of pure pain, and it served Naruto all the better. He twisted the organs, almost as if they were shoelaces, and he even crossed them over each other. He finally ripped them out, and all 3 of them spasmed. Most of the hollows were watching him amazed, with some even turning away. If you can disgust even other hollows, then you know you've got to be pretty depraved, thought Furumo's as he viewed the scene. Naruto left the 2 hollows there to bleed to death when he spotted his target. It was a regular hollow about his size, with distinctive mole features. A stubbly face, large claws even bigger than his, a brown earthy color, and terrible eyesight. It, like the rest of the hollows, was simply staring at him, reeling from the sight of what he just did. It didn't really notice his presence until he was about 15 feet away, and it nearly bolted when it did notice him. Naruto placed his paw on the mole's shoulder, his rank breath agony to the poor hollow. "I need you to do something for me," he whispered so only the mole could hear it. The mole's fear then dissolved into anger, and its violent shaking could be felt by the despicable hollow in front of him. "Like I'd do anything for you, you filthy hollow. In fact, I'll be the one to exterminate your filthiness for Baragan-sama." Naruto dodged a swipe from the large claws. "Who said you had a choice in the matter?" Naruto went in within his own claws, but much to his surprise, he found them stopped by the other hollow's own claws. The 2 sets of claw met with a clang, the nails becoming tangled in with each other. The mole's claws were dangerously close to his face, so he tilted his head back before using his free front paw to go in for another strike. Much to his chagrin, those were also stopped in the same method. "Filth! Filth! There shall be no filth in our holy God's perfect kingdom." The mole was screaming like a lunatic, screaming random words and praises towards Baragan. "You believe that king of yours is so holy. After he forced you into this place. What a fool you are," said Naruto, his penetrating yellow eyes staring into the mole's soul. "Shut up, filthy, vile fiend. You have no right to say that after what you did," the mole yelled, bringing up his clawed feet in a lethal kick. The claws caught the torso all up to Naruto's mask, leaving a shallow gash wound. Naruto moved back, releasing his hold on the mole's claws. The mole, seeing the opportunity, slashed Naruto's other side with his now free claws. The result was a much deeper and much longer slashing wound. The crowd cheered, and Naruto jumped away from the hollow, hissing in pain. This mole hollow could be a little tricky. There were several attempts to go assist the mole hollow, but they were all stopped by Furumo's and his groupies. That was good, he didn't need any interference. "Bastard, I was going to leave you in decent working condition. But now, I feel like getting a little brutal," cried Naruto angrily, clutching his wound gingerly. It became covered in blood. The mole grinned at him for the first time. "He's weaker than I thought. That's good, I might be able to finish this. There'll be no need for that, filth. Because you're about to die here anyway. Camara subterraneo." With those words, the mole used his sharp claws to burrow underneath the ground, becoming only visible through the moving pile of dirt. Naruto became giddy. This was just the confirmation he needed, the mole would do perfectly for the escape plan. But he would have to be careful with this attack. The mole was a quick digger, and he seemed to know the exact location of the various pitfall traps. He jumped to the side as the oncoming dirt crossed his path. But, quick as a flash, the mole turned at a sharp, right angle. He was coming into direct contact with Naruto. "Sure," he screamed in his mind as a strong paw gripped his back right ankle. The crowd watched in fascination as Naruto futilely attempted to escape, only to be effortlessly pulled underneath the dirt. Being dragged underground was not a pleasant experience for Naruto. High friction and particles of dirt were getting into his wounds, making them sting horrendously. Clods of dirt managed to find their way into his mouth, and when he tried to spit them out more dirt just went in. Overall, he was dragged about 50 feet underground, before falling into a surprisingly wide chamber. It was about 40 feet in length and height, the only light source coming dimly from the large hole where he was dragged down. "Do you like it, filth? This is my Camara Subterraneo. It lets me fight the way I like it, and it puts you at a heavy disadvantage," said a voice from behind him. It was obviously the mole, of course, but the strong darkness here made it difficult for him to discern where his opponent was. He was cut off in his thoughts by a slash to his back. The sneaky little bastard was playing dirty, eh? Well, he could do that too. The fox panned his head around, looking for any sign of the mole. "It's no use, filth. Your over-reliance on your eyesight make it impossible for you to grasp where I am. Whereas I, spending a lot of my time underground, know exactly where you are right now. So just sit back and let me kill you. It will make it a lot easier for the both of us." Another slash to the shoulder. Naruto blanched from it, flying back into the dirt wall. A little bit of dirt fell onto Naruto's head, and the whole chamber caved in on itself a small bit. Naruto grinned despite his injuries. He just got a good idea. "Don't you dare grin, you filth," screeched the mole hollow as it sped directly as Naruto. Naruto continued to smile. This sure was a stupid hollow. Didn't he realize he could locate the hollow by sound if it talked to him? Apparently not. Reflexively, Naruto turned around and forcefully grabbed the hollow's mask, slamming the mole hollow into the ground. The mole hollow struggled futilely under the stronger hollow, desperately searching for a way out. "You know, even if I killed you now, I'd never be able to find a way out of this hole. I'm not much of a digger, see, so you're going to have to burrow me out of here," said Naruto in a pleasant tone, even if it held nothing but mirth and hatred underneath the exterior. The mole hollow grinned nervously. "And why would I do that? My claws are still free, so I've still got the advantage. You need me, so you can't kill me." Naruto was unfazed by the news. He calmly raised his back foot, before kicking the dirt wall behind him forcefully. There was a large rumble from above them, and more dirt fell down from the earthen ceiling. The smile slowly disappeared from the mole's face. "That's why. If you don't burrow us out of here, I'll collapse this place," said Naruto. The mole looked like he was about to say something, but his mouth was covered by Naruto's paw. "Look, this is a demand. When I say you're going to get me out of here, you say, yes. You understand?" The mole nodded, panicking sadness appearing underneath its mask. "I'll just pretend to bring him back up there. Then I'll leave him when I get the chance." Naruto hoisted the mole up, pointing his sharp claws at his neck. "If you even think about betraying me, I'll kill you so fast that you won't even know what's coming," he whispered. Comedic tears rolled out of the mole's mask. So Naruto's hostage began to work, burrowing his way out of the chamber. It was slower than normal because he was forced to stand in an upright position, because of the claws pointed at his necks. One false move. Naruto warned, as he ran his claws across the mole's neck. Enough to draw blood, but not enough to kill. Baragon didn't know what to think about this display in the arena. On one hand, he was angry and ashamed at his vassals because they were failing to kill this puny little group of hollows. Not to mention there was that unspeakable act performed by that fox hollow that had him shaking in pure rage. On the other hand, he was feeling ecstatic. Not many performances in the arena lasted for over an hour, and yet this one was lasting for almost 2 and still going. But, he was starting to the competition for these hollows wasn't big enough. The Ajuchas in the group was darting all over the place, slitting throats and generally not allowing anyone to touch his friends. And that fox hollow was no slouch either. The Ajuchas kept other hollows from attacking him, but in a one-on-one fight no one had managed to best him in battle yet. Then, he saw the mole hollow spring into action against the fox. At first, it looked like the mole was winning, administering several injuries to the fox hollow, as well as capturing it with his technique. But that all changed when the mole hollow resurfaced, the fox hollow's claws directly on his neck. The fox hollow promptly knocked out the mole, and that was when Barragan felt his ire rising. "Send out the Jillian," the king screamed, his obnoxious voice carrying over to all the arena. The entire arena froze. Furamos stared up at the king in almost fear. If Jillian were involved, then their chances of survival were now far more slim. The hollows in the crowd were silent for a moment, before their voices rose to a new level of cheering and laughter. Jillian fighting was a rare treat for them, so they were surely ecstatic. One by one, 5 enormous gates placed at various points in the arena opened. They were far too big for a normal hollow, so something of that size could only hold Jillian. There they were, coming out now. Black-cloaked and huge, they clumsily lumbered their way out of the gates, stupidly looking around the entire arena. They all had identical masks, not even one unique mask among them. There were about 30 to 40 of them in total, and they all began to mill around the center of the arena. One got its foot caught in a pitfall, but it was much too big to fall into that trap. Naruto and the mole had just resurfaced. Naruto opportunistically knocked out the mole as soon as he had finished his job, and placed him to the side. Naruto heard Barragan's order, and was almost floored by it. The Jillian were coming out, and that wasn't good for them. Furamos may be able to defend everyone against normal hollows, but there was no way he could handle 40 Jillian all by himself. The Jillian were congregating in the center. What were they doing? They seemed to be swaying in a back and forth motion, not particularly concentrated on one particular thing. The one closest to him was opening its mouth slowly, and the rest followed that example short after. A small ball of red had appeared in the Jillian's mouth, slowly gathering more and more energy towards the spherical center. A strange hissing noise came from the ball, almost like it was about to explode. Naruto's eyes widened. Oh, shit! The Jillian released their Zeros at the same time, the beams of energy going all over the arena. The light was blinding to everyone in the arena, and for a moment no one could see anything. The Zeros cleared, and the destruction was unbelievable. Every hollow in the arena except for Furamos, Naruto, and the mole had been obliterated. Not even the Los Noches hollows had been spared, and they too had been atomized along with Naruto's group. "Holy shit," said Naruto as he viewed the charred landscape. There weren't even burnt bodies hanging around, everyone had just been vaporized. Only Furamos had survived, the speed of the Ajuchas allowing him to dodge. Naruto himself had survived by hanging on the ledge to the hole he had just climbed out of, holding the unconscious mole hollow in one hand. He shuddered when he thought of what would have happened if he were up there. But he was barely in a better situation. Here he was, hanging for dear life on an unstable ledge whose fall would mean 100 feet down. He couldn't go up and fight, that would be just plain suicide. Naruto strained his mind, thinking of what he could do. There had to be something he could do to face those Jillian. But what? What? He came to a sudden realization, nearly falling from the surprise. A wide grin split on his face, he knew exactly what to do. He began swinging himself back and forth to gain momentum, the mole hollow flapping about in his grasp. Once he had gained enough, he let loose a powerful attack to the side of the dirt wall. The instability of the rare Huecomundo soil gave way under a few more kicks. The dirt flowed down the hole, and after a short time, there was a small platform that Naruto could safely drop down on and be relatively safe from attack. Once he dropped down, he checked the small entrance to be sure no Jillian could spot him. It seemed okay, plus everyone would think that he would have died from that last attack. He sat down crisscross on the dirt platform, closing his eyes as he did. He felt the cold Huecomundo breeze enter his pores, as well as the rough dirt floor. His mind focused on one thing, he blocked out all sensory distractions and earthly worries and slipped into a pure, blissful thought process. His breathing slowed, and for probably the first time since his death he was completely calm. He even forgot about where he was for a short time. Sometime during the experience, the ground changed from the earthy dirt to a cold puddle of water. He opened his eyes, seeing the all-too-familiar sewer around him. But there was something different about it this time. The walls around him had changed from the rustic khaki he remembered to an almost midnight black. The knee-deep water now came up to his waist, and it was no longer clear, cool, and refreshing. It was now a deep, murky red, and it could be as cold as Arctic water. Pipes and doors still lined the hallway, yet they now seemed more deteriorated and water-damaged than before. The more he walked down the hallway, the more the place unnerved him. While before it gave off a vibe of mysterious warmth, now it was colder, eviler. This was now nothing more than a madhouse for the insane. He noticed a door, more deteriorated and water-damaged than the rest. It was in a location at the end of the hall, and a strange unearthly glow emitted from it, creating a solitary globe of warmth in this dank, forsaken sewer. He walked up to the door, hypnotized by the entrancing light. The door opened with a creak, and Naruto had just reached his destination. He finally had reached the familiar wide chamber he was searching for. But it was different. The Kyuubi's cage was still there, but it was smaller, and the seal and bars seemed to fade in and out of existence. The water had disappeared, and gave way to a floor with a chessboard pattern, sort of like one you would see in a grand palace. Numerous paintings lined the walls, and disturbingly, they were all pictures of him. On the left side was the picture of the human him, painted with mostly whites and blues. All of the pictures showed him smiling, and he appeared to be a symbol of purity. But he was cartoonish and cubistic in this picture, almost like the painter was trying to say that this beautiful, pure being was nothing but an illusion. On the right side showed the rage-filled hollow he was today. Those paintings were painted with nothing but blacks and reds, and he was always a symbol of evil, which was a stark contrast to the pure human that was shown on the other side. Conversely, these paintings were done very realistically, like the painter was trying to show the reality of the situation. A red aura, followed by a demonic presence, drew his attention from the paintings to the Kyuubi's cage. The red aura made it difficult for Naruto to breathe, as the red chakra turned Ryatsu slithered into his pores, filling his very being with the essence of the Kyuubi. A deep bone-chilling voice brought him to his senses. My jailer finally decides to visit me for the first time since his death. And I thought you were too wrapped up in your thoughts of revenge to pay me any mind. I'm flattered, said the Kyuubi mockingly. The full body of the fox came into view, his large face grinning at Naruto. The fox had changed little since its death. It was still the same size and shape, and the only noticeable difference was the increased amount of hatred in its eyes, most likely as a result of its death along with Naruto's. Naruto said nothing back, focusing his eyes mistfully on the checkered floor. So, what brings you here, then? Asked the deep baritone voice of the Kyuubi. Naruto slowly brought his head up to meet the gaze of the other fox. I'm here to kill you. Kill me? The Kyuubi asked, sounding faintly amused. Its sadistic and arrogant nature would never allow Kyuubi to believe it could actually be killed. An awkward, tense silence ran through the halls for a good 20 seconds. Naruto disturbingly thought the paintings on the walls were vaguely staring at him accusingly, as if he were proclaiming an impossible idea. He straightened and stared up at the great beast blankly, as if he were expecting its passing amusement. A dark, powerful chuckle from the demon broke the silence. This was a delicate situation, and Kyuubi was taking no mind to that. Such an impudent little brat. You wish to kill me? Me, of all things. After all the things I've done for you. Who's the one who has always saved you all these years? Who's the one who gave you power when you needed it? Why me, of course. The Kyuubi paused for a moment. But I guess I shouldn't act so surprised. After all, you've always been an ungrateful little shit. Why should that change simply because we died? Naruto continued to stare, the first little flecks of anger seeping into his expression from the Kyuubi's bristling comments. He then turned away to look at the deteriorating seal, not wanting to appear bothered by the Kyuubi's remarks. Don't act all high and mighty with me, fox. From the looks of things, the seal is deteriorating. How long would it have been before you're free and you attempt to kill me? Responded Naruto. More laughter from the Kyuubi. It seems you have gained some intelligence since your little dance with death. Yes, the seal is still intact, despite the premise that I was to disappear from your subconscious and reappear on the landscape in about 100 years after your death. Then, you didn't take what my father said into account. I believe he meant for us to die together. The Kyubi sighed, an almost shameful somberness appearing in his tone of voice. That is unfortunately true. The Yandeme's seal was stronger than I anticipated, and instead of being thrust back into the living world, I instead remained sealed in you while existing in an afterlife that I honestly didn't expect. The larger fox said nothing for a moment, before it spoke again, now with a tone of sinister happiness. However, your father's talent with sealing wasn't perfect. True to what you said, the seal is indeed weakening, likely as a result of this abrupt change from chakra to this Ryoryoku, as you call it. No seal can completely handle such an abrupt change, and then of course, there's the matter of the change in energy. It appears to me that Ryoryoku isn't as strong a binding agent as chakra is. Its hold on the seal has several weak points at many places, causing the seal itself to structurally break down before our very eyes. The Kyubi laughed again, this time one of malicious delight at the prospect. Very soon the seal will break down completely, and I will be free to resume my place and wreak havoc on this new world again as I please. This time, when no blasted shinobi to hinder my progress. It was Naruto's turn to laugh now. That statement was just so idiotic to him that he couldn't help it. Oh, get over yourself, Kyubi. I'll admit it, you have power. Power that I need. But the afterlife has a lot more powerful beings than those in life. More powerful beings than you realize. You're not a force of nature anymore, just a very big hollow. Your Ryatsu is that of only a jillion to a low-level Ajuchas, and your power is nowhere near enough to be able to do as you please. If you tried that, you'd be annihilated instantly. That seemed to strike a nerve. Kyubi directed actual hot, burning fury at Naruto, rather than the cold anger he usually sent his way. It seems that the comment had really gotten under the Kyubi's skin. After all, centuries of being at the top, and then being told that you weren't powerful anymore. It had to be at least a little touchy. Silence, you insolent little brat. This seal will be off soon enough, and when that happens, I'll rip you to shreds. And I will personally go and bring destruction on this new world. That I guarantee. The beings in this world are nothing compared to me. Nothing, you understand, the Kyubi roared, its voice carrying with it a cataclysmic torrent that would have bowled over a human. Naruto stood his ground though, and wasn't even fazed by the fury of the Kyubi. In fact, he looked downright pleased by the reaction, as if he had succeeded at getting a rise out of a little kid instead of a 100-meter tall monster. So then, why don't I just hasten the process for the both of us? The Fox Hollow slowly walked up to the weakened seal, vaguely aware of the Kyubi's eyes narrowing menacingly at his approach. He smiled slyly, much to the confusion of the Kyubi. But the fox remained silent, mulling over whether it was a trick or not. Don't think about it too hard, Kyubi. I said before that I was going to kill you. I can't exactly do that if you're still locked up in that cage, now can I? Asked Naruto rhetorically. The larger fox grinned evilly. It seems you're eager for your own death. Naruto said nothing, and only split his face into a sinister grin that mirrored the Kyubi's own. Though his grin was for an entirely different purpose. He approached the cage, and with a monumental slowness that emphasized suspense, lifted his front, right paw and raised it to the cage. He was stopped by a long, tanned arm that came out of nowhere and strongly grasped the hollow's wrist. Naruto continued to stare blankly at the fox, his mouth slightly ajar in pure annoyed disbelief. He hadn't looked towards the owner of arm, but he had a feeling he wouldn't like who it was. Oh fuck, not again, were his annoyed thoughts, as he thought back to the similar situation to this when he was alive. He looked up, the Kyubi looked pissed, kind of like Christmas was cancelled. It was the same expression it wore when his father had showed up in his mind. One of angry recognition. Naruto looked to his left, and to his surprise, it wasn't his father. It was him. A human form of him that was dressed in the robes of the detestable Shinigami. What a cliché development. Naruto and the Kyuubi stared at the other Naruto with a slight amount of anger. The other Naruto stared back at them with a calm serenity that didn't belay any opinion or emotions towards either of them. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that," the new Naruto said. His voice was lighter and more whimsical, but it was essentially the same voice as Naruto when he was alive. Just another thing to chalk up on the list of similarities. What are you doing here?" asked the Kyuubi. Naruto looked back at the fox, the look on his face questioning. "What's going on here?" "Who is he?" he asked the Kyuubi. The Kyuubi gave a low, angry growl. "I am what you should have been, Naruto," said the Shinigami, cutting off the Kyuubi's speech pattern. Naruto glared in response to that, not exactly keen on being a Shinigami. A faint look of smug disappointment passed by the other Naruto's face for only a split second, though it was long enough for Naruto to see it. "What do you mean?" asked Naruto. "I'm not obligated to explain that to you. Just be assured that I'm here to help you." "Help me? What makes you think you need to help me? Killing has never been so much fun for me. Now that I'm a hollow, I don't have to worry about the village sending Hunter-nin or anything after me. I can do whatever I want," said Naruto with glee. "So, it's true. Becoming a hollow really has twisted your mind," whispered the other Naruto to himself. "It looks like I'll have to do this the hard way," he said louder, slowly putting his hand on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Naruto's eyes widened. "A Zanpakuto? Why the hell do you have one of those things?" asked Naruto. The other Naruto raised the gleaming katana to his face, so that it was partially obscured by the blade. "I told you, I'm what you should have been. You, Naruto, when you died you should have went through Kanso and entered Soul Society, where you should have become a Shinigami and exterminated more hollows than any other. You were going to become So Taishu." The last part came out as a yell. Naruto leaned back a bit. That sounds kind of like my old dream of being Hokage. That's exactly what I meant. If you had become a Shinigami, we would have worked hard to become So Taishu. We would have gained the respect of every last Shinigami there, just as we always wished for. We would protect Konoha, the village you loved, from hollows dutifully. You could become happy again, and live a full life in Soul Society. You don't have to turn to the path of revenge and hatred. Just let me help you," said the other Naruto in yet another attempt to end this without violence. Naruto stood hunched over from the proclamation, his sides shaking violently. The other Naruto smiled happily, believing that he had finally gotten through to the hollow. That is, before Naruto stood up, reared back his head, and laughed uproariously. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I don't give a fuck about the recognition of others anymore." He paused for a moment to stare mockingly at the other Naruto. "Now, I just want them to die." The Shinigami stared at the hollow, his mouth slightly agape. "So, it's true. You really have gone off the deep end since becoming a hollow. Fortunately for you, this is just the cause of you becoming a hollow, Naruto. I can easily rectify that," he said, closing his mouth as a look of determination set itself upon his face. Hollow Naruto gave a hearty smirk. "Just try it, fake me. You're just another Shinigami I need to slaughter." Inwardly, Naruto was very proud of himself. The offer was scarily tempting, and the thought of going back to his human psyche was honestly frightening to him. But in a way, if he was able to resist and triumph over his other self, he would finally have killed off his humanity. Quite literally. He was already doing more cruel and vile things. His conscience had disappeared with his hollow transformation, and he found himself more and more immersed in his evil joy and wonderful ambitions. It was effortless. If this thing won, he would be dragged back into the light, and with it he would lose his sense of happiness. He would once again feel pain. The pain of betrayal. There was a tender bit of happiness, yes, but it was fleeting. Before long, you will be betrayed by those you love and plunged into the depths of pure despair and hopelessness. That wasn't pure happiness. This was pure happiness. This honest-to-God fighting and destruction didn't wear the mask called betrayal. It was always brutally honest and right in your face. If someone betrays you, kill them, without mercy. Useless feelings like love and compassion never get in the way as they do on the good side. You could never kill without feeling those emotions. Your existence as a hollow is a mistake, Naruto. If I can slay you with this Zanpakuto, I can take control of our body and set us on the right path. I'm a part of you, Naruto. Why can't you see I'm doing this for our sake? He asked hysterically, as his first Zanpakuto strike was blocked by Naruto's claws. Naruto pivoted, trying to hit the other Naruto with his tail. Our Sake. What a crock of shit. The only thing I want is to continue on with what was doing. I don't want to be set on the so-called right path. To be honest, the other Naruto was not surprised by this kind of response. A small part of him was actually disappointed. He wanted Naruto to willingly choose to come back to the right path. He had extended to him this chance to make it all right. Doing it by force, while somewhat effective, would never have the same results as coming willingly. These were his thoughts as he rapidly slashed down his Zanpakuto on the hollow. The tip of the blade caught the hollow's mask and made a shallow cut on it, but otherwise caused little damage to the abomination. "You're open," shouted Naruto, as he darted along the floor of the chamber to reach the other Naruto. He fanned his single tail outward, the momentum and force attempted to drill a hole in its opponent. Naruto's eyes widened when he felt his tail go straight through the other Naruto. A hazy distortion sprung up in front of the disturbed area, before the misty substance returned to the main body. A disoriented Naruto flew forward, prompting the other Naruto to take the opportunity to go for the killing blow, a downward slash across the mask. At the last second, Naruto impulsively moved, barely avoiding the fatal blow. He was not able to avoid a nasty slash across his side, though. The hollow landed on his feet clumsily, clutching his wound as soon as he was grounded. He inhaled precious air heavily, turning his back away from the Kyuubi and the other Naruto. Shit! Naruto took off down the hallway leading away from the Kyuubi's cage as soon as he had recovered, his blood dripping from the wound and mixing with the murky water. Water rippled from beneath him and the other Naruto and Kyuubi continued to hear splashing even after Naruto had turned the corner. The other Naruto blinked at the spontaneous retreat, before he followed up with a quiet, accusatory yell. No one ran away from him. Wait, he called after Naruto, running after the hollow and stupidly waving his sword around in the air like a madman. The Kyuubi almost sweat dropped. Same old idiots. The halls and passageways echoed with the yells and screams of the two Narutos as the Shinigami one chased after the hollow one. The hollow had the advantage in speed, as well as better traction in water, so the slow, two-legged Shinigami was left in the dust. Panting, the Shinigami Naruto cursed. The hollow Naruto was a slippery one. Dishonorable too, he probably had some nasty tricks in store for him along the way. Of course, none of them would work due to his condition, but they would still be an annoyance. True to his thoughts, he heard a door creak slightly to his left from around the corner. He raised his Zanpakuto, and with a carefree zeal he sauntered on over and rounded the corner confidently. A waterlogged wooden door, danker and damper than the rest, stood slightly ajar at the end of the hall. It was almost completely black in there, dim light from the hall filtering in from the cracked door. The other Naruto eased towards the door, wary of what lied ahead, despite his intangibility. An odd look of distant recognition entered the human Naruto's eyes. But, this room is... A look of knowing went across his face. He smiled. Perhaps I can get through to him after all. He came around to the front of the doorway, passing a missing, gloomy lantern whose absence caused a disarray in the usually uniform row of lighting. The Shinigami opened the door with a wide creak, viewing a seemingly never-ending void of darkness save for the little sliver of light coming from the outside. He heard footsteps in the dark. Naruto was shuffling around quite a bit in here. Being a creature of darkness, he would be much more well-suited for hiding in some. The noises stopped, and for a tense moment, absolutely nothing happened. And then, a lantern flew from the darkness towards the Shinigami. The other Naruto was caught off guard by the sudden action, but he was saved by his own intangibility. The lantern shattered on the ground. Pieces of glass flew throughout the air, and the candle that should have lit his robes on fire died out, and his robes were unsynced. The other Naruto smirked. "Sorry, but fire doesn't work on me, Naruto, so I'm not gonna die anytime soon." There came a voice from the darkness. "So it would seem. What a shame." The voice was smooth and mocking, but there was a slight amount of panic in its tone. "Don't beat yourself up over it. My mental state is just far more stable and healthy than yours. You are a hollow, after all." There came nothing but silence from the darkness, so the other Naruto used this as an opportunity to continue. "You know, this is technically my mind as well. I don't think you realize this, but an individual's mindscape can be shaped to their liking to a certain extent. There are many things that are unchangeable, but there are things that are. Like this." The other Naruto stood there effortlessly as the entire room lit up in the time span of a second. The hollow Naruto was standing about 20 feet away, fittingly looking like a deer caught in headlights. The Shinigami Naruto smiled cheekily. "Found ya." The lit room's appearance was very interesting. The stone brick that made up the walls and floor had changed color to a harsh, charcoal black. Both Narutos were actually standing on some kind of scaffolding, with a large circular area in the center below them surrounded by guardrails. Down in the pit, there were roughly 30 of these square, black objects. It was unclear what they were from their point of view, but smoke was clearly rising from them. They also seemed to be connected to something, since large, metallic pipes rose from the object, connecting to the wall of the room. With speed and agility, Naruto hopped over the guardrails, falling almost 100 feet to the ground floor of the room. The Shinigami Naruto continued to smile knowingly, appearing to realize some kind of advantage that he had found, but his posture would betray that as he impatiently ran over to the small staircase to the side. Why didn't he think of this before? He's been around this place for a while, but he supposed the thought had just slipped his mind. At a closer glance, Naruto could tell that they were furnaces. Indeed, they were furnaces, clunky kettle black furnaces that were all alight with flame. And there weren't just orange flames. There were all sorts of colors. Red, yellow, blue, light blue, even black was intertwined in the mix. Naruto stood in a rare, curious awe as he watched the smoke from the flames rise up into the pipes. The strangest part about the spectacle was the varying intensities of the flames. Some flames burned with a size and heat unparalleled, while others were just a small wisp that was barely providing smoke. Naruto's eyes were drawn to two furnaces adjacent to each other. These two were the only one that were completely put out. Naruto was transfixed at the sight of those two furnaces. They seemed very familiar, almost like they were a missing piece of himself. What this meant he didn't know. How could he feel some sort of connection to an inanimate object? "What is this place?" asked Naruto in wonder. He didn't expect to get an answer. "This room is the source of all your emotions," came the Shinigami Naruto's voice on the staircase. Naruto turned around to look at him, for once his feelings of mystique outweighing his hostility for his other self. "Emotions?" asked Naruto. The other Naruto paused on the staircase, a faraway look coming into his misty eyes. "Yes, emotions. Every one of those furnaces is the fuel for your emotions. The size of the fire represents the prevalence of a certain emotion, and the smoke that comes through the other pipes allows you to feel that emotion." He mirrored Naruto by staring at the two unlit furnaces. Compared to the others, they seemed pretty pathetic without a roaring fire. And those two pitiful furnaces over there represent your capacity to feel the emotions of love and compassion. The fact that they are unlit shows just how depraved you've become. "If anything, that's an improvement," whispered Naruto under his breath. The other Naruto caught the words and frowned. "No, not really. And that's why I'm going to ask you one last time. Won't you reconsider my offer? If you do, I won't have to take control of your body." Naruto squinted his eyes suddenly, shakes racking his body as he clenched his fists. He didn't like being given conditions. Love. Compassion. I don't understand what those emotions are supposed to be. Those emotions lead to nothing but trust, which eventually will always lead to betrayal. Am I supposed to be so intoxicated by those emotions that I'll always be able to follow those I love blindly even though I will likely be betrayed by them someday? No. It's better to just reside in hatred and psychopathy than to have those emotions in my core being. Naruto was simply supposed to be monologuing to himself, but somehow that blasphemous comment managed to enrage the Shinigami Naruto. The other Naruto rushed at him, grabbing the larger Hollow's shoulders and shaking. The Hollow Naruto stared blankly and dispassionately at the irate Shinigami. Ero-sennin would be ashamed if he saw you right now. Wasn't the entire goal of your life to get rid of the cycle of hatred? Now here you are reveling it. Why are you being so weak? Just because you're a Hollow doesn't mean you have to be like this. Naruto's eyes widened with fury. Fuck you. I am not weak. Ero-sennin was an idiot and a failure who liked to talk big. He'd never be able to stop the cycle of hatred, because there is no way to stop it. It's not some random piece of equipment that you can just repair. The Shinigami continued to shake him violently. Then prove you're not weak. You're just whining like a baby simply because you don't want to feel betrayal or something. You're making no sense, shouted the other Naruto, as he violently shook the Hollow Naruto's shoulders again. Shut up, said Naruto acidly in a cold fury. There was no smile on his face. In response to Naruto's verbal thrashing, Naruto reared back his front right paw, bringing it forward to slash the other Naruto in the midsection. The other Naruto's face contorted in shock as his intangibility became useless and pain erupted from his right shoulder to his left hip. The other Naruto jumped back from the nasty wound inflicted to his torso. How? He asked. Naruto usually would have grinned at this point, but in this particular instance he did not. You gave yourself away when you said your mental strength was greater than mine. You also said that the one in control of the mind would be able to influence this place, and proved it when you lit up this room to find me. So what? Heaved the other Naruto, putting distance between himself and Naruto. I figured it out now. When two entities are fighting for control of the same mind and body, the one with the better resolve will always win. At this time, your resolve was greater than mine because of your intense desire to return me to your side. Whereas I simply wanted to get on with my life. The other Naruto stared at the ceiling absent-mindedly. But now. A slight pause. He slowly twisted his head around, looking at the wounded Shinigami with a fierce amount of determination. I'm going to strengthen my resolve on killing you. That will show you I'm not weak. I will show you that lack of love and compassion does not make you weak. On the contrary, it only increases your combat abilities. The Shinigami Naruto's eyes widened as Naruto thrust into action, his speed and force increasing tenfold. He painfully lifted his Zanpakuto up, barely managing to stop the blow. Naruto's claws ground against his Zanpakuto as Naruto passed overhead. Thinking it was safe, the other Naruto didn't notice his counterpart slam his single tail against his back until it was too late. The faux Shinigami flopped clumsily, crashing into one of the empty furnaces. He was being beaten at his own game. He noticed Naruto rushing at him with a determination unparalleled by anything he had ever seen before. This is insane. A normal opponent would at least give me time to recover. Time seemed to freeze for a while, as even though Naruto's claws went into his abdomen, his mind was completely numb to the pain. Naruto felt a sense of triumph as he lodged his claws into a fatal spot just as the Shinigami was standing up. He roughly pulled the claws from his victim, sparing him no pain or mercy. He wanted to relish in this sense of accomplishment from killing the last remaining remnant of his human side. He watched as the Shinigami stumbled around, finally leaning on one of the empty furnaces. Naruto narrowed his eyes suddenly as the other Shinigami sent a hushed laugh his way. What are you? He started, as the Shinigami reached his hand up to the furnace. You should never lower your resolve until the very end, lectured the other Naruto in a whisper. After he said those words, he began chanting quietly. Naruto was unable to pick up on anything that he was saying. He also began to fumble around in his pockets, almost as if he were looking for something. The other Naruto was willing the last of his mental strength. A slight pinkish flame was lighting at the end of his finger, a tiny pinprick of pink flame in a sea of color, and when the Shinigami placed it in the furnace. Whoosh! The furnace flared up in a pinkish flame. So quickly that it almost took off the Shinigami's hand. Naruto could just stare at the lit furnace, its flame almost the size of the black one across the room, which Naruto assumed to be hatred. Naruto could just stare in shock and awe as the Shinigami moved on to the next furnace, despite his crippling injuries. Again, the Shinigami repeated his action on the previous furnace, getting the same result as he did on the previous one. Only this time, the fire was of a cool, cobalt blue instead of a soft pink. What did you, Naruto began, before memories flooded his system. All the memories of his killing, his torment, his actions were all rushing back into his brain. And it hurt. He clutched his head, screaming in agony at the overwhelming torrent of guilt hit his system. He buckled over, falling to his knees while still keeping the threshold on his head. He finally collapsed on the ground at the same time the Shinigami did, both panting wildly from mental and physical pain respectively. Naruto was still roaring, while the other Naruto was panting with a satisfied, rhythmic breath. He forcibly turned his head to look at his hollow counterpart. I used the last of my. The other Naruto stopped to cough up blood. Mental strength to light your furnaces of love and compassion. You will now be able to feel those emotions once more. He smiled smugly. And with it comes the feelings of guilt and remorse. Naruto roared angrily. How dare you? How dare you do this to me? Take it away right now, asshole, he demanded. The other Naruto smiled wider. See, you are weak. Getting so worked up over these wonderful emotions, you don't even realize that I did you a favor. Did me a favor? Yelled back Naruto. You call this a favor? I was better the way before. You took away my joy. You took away my fun. How fucking dare you do this to me? Naruto rambled on. Pretty soon, you'll be back to your old self. Your caring, compassionate self, said the other Naruto joyfully as his body started to spasm. Have a wonderful life. Naruto, said the other Naruto somberly, using the last of his strength to close his eyes. He drew his final breath, and never opened his eyes again. And he was smiling. A look of pure, peaceful serenity was marred upon his face, an unsurpassed artistry among life, before he dissolved into wisps of pure, white ryatsu that beautifully dispersed throughout the entire room. It looked almost angelic. He truly was too good for this world. That infuriated Naruto beyond belief. Back to my old self, huh? You wish, asshole, he said as another spasm of guilt racked his body. They were not lessening in any intensity, and Naruto was left wondering when he'd be able to get over this. But, my dear Shinigami, you don't realize that you've just achieved the opposite of what you're hoping for. Well, look who's back. Have an interesting encounter with your other self, now did you? Asked the Kyuubi mockingly as Naruto entered his chamber once again. Naruto's mood had taken a turn for the worse, and Kyuubi just loved riling him up. Yeah, I killed him, said Naruto flatly, as another painful spasm shook his body. Who was that and how was he here, anyway? The Kyuubi's grin widened further. Ah, now that is a very interesting tale. The Kyuubi sensed Naruto's silence, so he continued. You see, the human mind doesn't usually manifest itself to the body like the way it does to you. Usually, it will remain hidden in the sidelines, simply carrying out all its duties in private. But you, and the other Jinchuriki are a very special case. The mind has to make itself visible so we can interact with each other. Naruto nodded. What does that have to do with why he was there? I'm getting there, the Kyuubi roared, annoyed at Naruto. Anyway, what you just saw was the essence of the plus side of your soul, the Kyuubi said, ignoring Naruto's shocked visage. Every plus has a sort of inner world. It's where the Shinigami's powers and Zanpakuto's spirit reside and are awakened. When a plus transforms into a hollow, the inner world collapses and any chance of Shinigami powers are destroyed. What is mostly unknown is that when a plus is transforming into a hollow, the essence of that plus will usually attempt to take refuge in the inner world. However, since the inner world collapses, the essence and energy of the plus is destroyed as well. However, in your case, my chamber and your manifested mind was connected to the inner world. Your plus essence was able to escape to your mind and avoid termination by the collapse of the inner world. He was also able to interact with your now destroyed Shinigami powers, the Kyuubi finished. And I know all about the little incident in the room of emotions. It seems that your plus essence activated your love and compassion furnaces. How pathetic, the Kyuubi roared with laughter at the unfortunate hollow. Naruto, who was mulling over the complications of his plus essence, now scowled coldly at the Kyuubi. I've been thinking about that little complication. You're right, it was pathetic that I allowed this kind of sacrilegious thing to happen to me. And as much as I hate to admit, the other side of me was right. I was being weak, Naruto explained. The Kyuubi was surprisingly silent during Naruto's monologue. No insults, no banter, and no sarcastic responses. It warmed Naruto's heart slightly. Naruto placed his hand over his non-existent heart. I was immersing myself in hatred because I was afraid of loving. Fear is what made me weak. No more, I decided. I'm going to do these things because I feel like it. I won't conform to these standard definitions of Shinigami, human, and hollow. I will now consider loving to be an annoyance, rather than something to fear. Naruto was silent for a moment. And I hate him. I hate him. I hate everything about that guy. How dare he do something like that to me? Kyuubi looked thoughtful for a second. My chest, my heart. Love. Compassion. This is what I'm feeling. Feeling these emotions after being without them for so long. What is this? He shrieked, going through another spasm. That being gave you back your sanity. Naruto froze, staring at the water on the ground, his eyes wide open in a murderous rage. Sanity? Now I understand. The ability to love is the definition of sanity. I'm sane. Despite all my issues, I'm sane. This feeling of love, this feeling of compassion. These annoying feelings will keep me from acting on my dreams. It will keep my volatile behavior and confusing mannerisms in line. It will keep me sane. Naruto whipped his head up to stare at Kyuubi with confused, wide eyes. Then I'll become insane. Anything that will keep my ambition from withering away. If it means being insane, I'll do it. I'll immerse myself in such vile, heinous acts of destruction and cruelty towards the human and Shinigami species that I'll numb myself to the pain. Those lit furnaces in the emotion room will go back to the way they should be. I will kill my heart, he finished poetically. He was panting when he finished, rage and hate not even close to subsiding. What about your friend, Furamos? How will he fit into your whole new view of life? Kyuubi's words once again caught Naruto off guard. Furamos? What would he do with him? He didn't love Furamos, of course, but that didn't stop him from caring about what happened to him. Would he hold the insect in the same disregard he held Shinigami and humans? Even before this I still held no hostile feelings towards other hollows. I don't think that's going to change, he said uncertainly. The Kyuubi grinned nastily. He had caught Naruto in a mistake. Naruto hastily changed the subject. But this is enough about my emotions problem. I still need to kill you and take your power. We are not going to talk anymore and you will not mock me with your comments anymore. Without even bothering to listen to Kyubi's reply, Naruto rushed right up to the Kyubi's cage and tore the seal clean off. The flimsy piece of paper came off as easily as it should have. For a moment, everything was quiet. Naruto didn't talk, Kyubi didn't talk, and only the sound of dripping water from the moldy ceiling outside filled their ears. After about a minute, a strange ball appeared where the now unlocked cage was. It expanded rapidly, fanning out in all directions, and both Naruto and Kyubi were engulfed in a huge burst of yellow light. In 3 years' time, Konoha had gotten completely back on its feet, and secured itself as the continuing strongest nation in the ninja world. The Konoha 10 had surely risen throughout, every single one of them becoming at least a high-level jounin. Their efficiency and success of their high-level missions brought in much income for the Hai no Kuni, and Konoha was able to rebuild itself in record time. 19-year jounin Haruno Sakura was never more proud of her village as she walked through the new main street of Konoha. During the 3 years that had passed, Sakura had improved dramatically in her skills, rapidly closing the gap between herself and Tsunade. With both medical skills and inhuman strength, she had become one of the most respected jounin of Konohagakure, especially since the loss of her teacher, Kakashi. Children walked along her path, playing the classic ninja game. Delicious smells and wonderful sounds assaulted her nose and ears, and it would seem like Pain's invasion had never happened at all. Everyone was just so happy, despite all the changes. For example, Danzo's rule. The man had established himself as not a bad leader. He actually had a secret admiration for the Sandaime, and despite his political disagreements with the man, loved Konoha very dearly. His attitude towards the other nations wasn't so peachy though. His dogmatic and militaristic stance got on other countries' nerves at times, so much that Suna had broken their alliance with them. He was just too obsessed with Konoha's social, political, and military superiority. The young woman looked around. There were posters everywhere. On buildings, on fences, on benches. Everywhere. And they all contained the same thing. Propaganda. Posters spouting one-sided information about their enemies, while glorifying Konoha. The will of fire was often used as a propaganda slogan. This was one of the main downsides of Danzo's rule. Sakura herself had changed much over 3 years, after realizing that she was a late bloomer. She had gotten a bit taller, now clocking in at 5 feet 6 inches. She grew her hair out again, not as long as when she was 12, but long enough to reach her upper back. Her breasts had gotten much bigger, and although they weren't on par with Tsunade or Hinata, they were still rather large. Her clothing had gotten much more liberal. She still wore a similar red top to what she wore 3 years ago, but this one was much more form-fitting and low-cut, exposing much of her sizable cleavage. She also took a page out of Ino's book by cutting off her shirt about halfway, showing off a gratuitous view of her bare belly. Naturally, she attracted much of the male attention due to this and her admittedly beautiful face as she matured into a woman. But that didn't matter. Despite all the attention she got from men, it never mattered. Because both of her boys were dead. Her anger at Naruto's death had subsided shortly after, because nothing but grief and denial remained when she realized how much she actually missed the blonde. And to make things worse, Kakashi had also been reported killed in the struggle. Then about a month or two later, Sasuke's death was reported. He was torn to shreds by some foreign shinobi force, Danzo had publicly announced. The absolute brutality of the killing was horrific to even listen to. The 2 successive deaths of her teammates hit the poor girl hard. Naruto's death alone had been enough, he wasn't even given a funeral where she could grieve. Then, the boy who she twistedly but truthfully loved came home brutally eviscerated, and it was too much. Sakura was promptly torn to pieces. She spent almost 3 months wallowing in depression, rarely leaving her room and crying herself to sleep over her lost loved ones. Then, at the end of the 3rd month, after her parents' desperate attempts to console her, the rest of the Konoha 10 extended the hand of comfort to her. They would spend a month attempting to reach her, then another 5 to return her to old self. And even then, she just wasn't the same. She never carried that sense of hot-blooded spirit she had when she was younger. There was always a sort of brokenness in her eyes every time they looked at her. She had also gotten crueler on her missions, and she honestly picked up some of Danzo's dogmatic attitude when she heard a foreign force killed Sasuke. She stared up at the Hokage monument. Danzo's face had been added to the only remaining space on the mountain. She was wondering if that was symbolic of him being the last Hokage when a perky, feminine voice called out to her. "Sakura! Hey, Sakura!" The pink-haired woman recognized that voice anywhere. Ino was the one who had gotten closest to Sakura after the death of her two teammates. They once again shared a sort of friendship they had during the academy, without all the drama and rivalry messing up their relationship. "Hello, Ino Pig," she said quietly. That old nickname never wore off. She viewed the changes Ino had undergone, and those were very few. Besides the older look to her, there was little change that occurred in Ino over the years. She was still the same height, had the same hair, and wore the same clothes. The blonde girl was running over to her, panting wildly. There was a panic-stricken look on her face, almost like she had seen a ghost. "Ino?" asked Sakura, confused at the sudden behavior. One of Ino's more interesting talents was her ability to get information before anyone else did. At the age of 17, Ino was drafted into the ANBU, rising rapidly through the ranks of the torture and interrogation force, before becoming right hand to Ibiki himself. Sakura placed her hands on Ino's shoulders worriedly, trying to calm her friend. "Ino, what's wrong? Calm down and speak to me calmly," Sakura demanded of her friend. Ino slowed her breathing at once, acutely aware of the information she needed to get out quickly. Rokudame-same has called for all of the high-ranking jounin in his office. This is urgent news. Everything will be explained there. Sakura blinked at her position in the middle of the line of jounin, solid indifference to the situation her reaction. Honestly, she had seen it coming for quite some time now. Danzo had been looking for an excuse for close to a year now. It all started when Danzo's experiments with Kyuubi's chakra were brought to a close. Despite her anger and protests, Danzo had taken Naruto's corpse after his death, and blatantly defiled it by searching for residual amounts of Kyuubi's chakra. Much to her shame, she and the rest of the medical and sealing specialists had been assigned the duty of replicating the use of the fox's cloak in everyday ninja. And they succeeded. Using captured nin from the destroyed Otagakure as guinea pigs, they successfully received a one-tailed Kyuubi cloak in the ninja. It took them almost 2 years of constant, heartbreaking, for her work, but they finally succeeded in receiving a one-tailed cloak in the ninja. It wasn't as much as Danzo would have liked, but nonetheless he was proud. The medical and sealing knowledge of Konoha was superb, and they had achieved what ninja villages could only dream of in 2 years flat. This would surely lead Konoha into a golden age of prosperity. At least, that was what Sakura told herself as she worked on a blatant insult to Naruto's memories. That is what Naruto would have liked, right? For the village to prosper. 48 out of 50 Konoha shinobi had successfully undergone the long procedure of getting the Kyuubi's chakra implanted into their chakra coils. Pretty soon, she too, and the rest of the Konoha 10 would go through theirs as well. But, therein lies the problems. Spies from the despicable Uegakure no Sato had infiltrated the village as leaf shinobi. They personally viewed the inner workings of the procedure. Fortunately, one spy had been captured and turned over to Ibiki. Otherwise, they would have never gotten the information they needed. And 5 days ago, there had been a little skirmish near the Hai no Kuni's border between a squad of Konoha nin and a squad of Iwa nin. The incident ended badly for the leaf shinobi, all 3 genin and 1 jounin dead at the hands of the Iwa nin. But the whole fight was just 2 squads of ninja there at the wrong place at the wrong time. But Danzo had turned it into a propaganda campaign. He staunchly proclaimed it was nothing more than cold-blooded murder by the barbarians of Uegakure no Sato, and the villagers believed him. Soon, the whole village was chanting for blood of Uegakure, and war seemed inevitable. And there it was. A declaration of war against Uegakure no Sato. That was the reason for the meeting. Sakura vacated the building once the meeting was over, feeling slightly more smug satisfaction that she thought she should. She didn't care about Iwa, but she was more than a little concerned about how her loved ones would fare in this war. This was no doubt in her mind that Konoha would sweep Iwa in the upcoming war, especially with their new weapon. But still, she couldn't help but feel a little worried about this. The whole village was beginning to prepare for war. There was rationing of food and more ninja were set for implantation of Kyubi chakra, including herself. She pushed those thoughts from her head as she walked away from the building, thinking about the true reason for the war. Hai no Kuni would probably somehow annex Tsuchi no Kuni after all this was done. That was Danzo's goal. To exert his superiority after gaining so much awesome power. The first stage to building the Konohan Empire. So this was it, for this part of the What If. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this What If, and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. And also subscribe to this channel for more awesome content. See you in the next video. Peace.